Welcome in, fellow Potterheads. Tonight, beneath the starry ceiling of the Great Hall, we will be going over magical tales from the wizarding world to guide you gently into the realm of dreams. Before we disappear behind the veil of dreams, take a moment to cast your support spell, tap the like button, and join our magical community by subscribing. Also, I'm curious what time it is in your corner of the wizarding world. Whether you're watching from California, Hogsmeade, or London, share your location in the comments below. Your participation will be greatly appreciated and helps our magical community grow stronger. Now, the time for incantations has passed. Dim your lights, find your most comfortable position, and prepare to be transported to the world of witchcraft and wizardry as we begin tonight's magical tales. Chapter 1. The Revival of the Triwizard Tournament. Ancient traditions have a way of resurfacing in the wizarding world, carried through generations like whispers in forgotten corridors. Tonight, as shadows dance across ancient tomes and moonlight spills through leaded windows, we shall explore one such tradition, a competition of extraordinary magic and daring that lay dormant for centuries before its momentous revival. The Triwizard Tournament stands as perhaps the most renowned magical competition in European wizarding history. Its origins stretch back some 700 years, conceived as a friendly competition between the three largest European schools of wizardry: Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, Beauxbaton's Academy of Magic, and Durmstrang Institute. In those early days, the tournament represented the pinnacle of magical cooperation, a way for young witches and wizards of different nationalities to meet and forge bonds beyond their respective school walls. Imagine yourself walking through the medieval halls of Hogwarts in those distant centuries, when champions first competed for eternal glory. Torchlight would have flickered across stone walls as students gathered, their excited whispers echoing throughout the castle. The selection of champions was always a momentous occasion, with representatives from each school chosen to face challenges designed to test magical prowess, daring intellect, and courage in the face of the unknown. Yet the tournament's illustrious history was not without its shadows. As the centuries passed, the tasks grew increasingly dangerous, the magic more experimental and untested. The competitive spirit between schools sometimes overshadowed the original intent of fostering international magical cooperation. By the late 18th century, the death toll had risen to unacceptable levels. After a particularly disastrous tournament in 1792, during which a cockatrice the champions were supposed to capture went on a rampage, injuring the heads of all three schools, the Triwizard Tournament was discontinued. The Great Hall of Hogwarts would no longer witness the ceremonial arrival of foreign students. The enchanted goblet would gather dust in some forgotten chamber. For 200 years, the Triwizard Tournament became merely a historical footnote, a cautionary tale about the dangers of magical competition taken too far. The wizarding world changed dramatically in those intervening centuries. The International Confederation of Wizards established greater cooperation between magical governments. The Statute of Secrecy solidified the separation between magical and muggle worlds. Educational standards evolved, and with them, attitudes toward international magical exchange. It was in this climate of change that Bartemius Crouch Sr., head of the Department of International Magical Cooperation, and Ludo Bagman, head of the Department of Magical Games and Sports, began discussing the potential revival of the tournament. Picture them in Crouch's meticulously organized office at the Ministry of Magic, surrounded by international magical cooperation treaties and scrolls of regulations, debating the merits of reintroducing this ancient tradition to a modern wizarding world. Their discussions must have been lengthy and occasionally heated. Crouch, known for his rigid adherence to rules and regulations, would have insisted on stringent safety measures. Bagman, with his love of sport and spectacle, would have emphasized the excitement and prestige such an event would bring. Somewhere between these two perspectives, a plan emerged to revive the Triwizard Tournament while addressing the concerns that had led to its discontinuation. By the spring of 1994, the decision was made. The Triwizard Tournament would be held once more, hosted at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry under the watchful eye of Headmaster Albus Dumbledore. But this would not be the unrestricted competition of centuries past. New rules were established to prioritize the safety of participants. Most notably, an age restriction was implemented. Only students of 17 years or older would be permitted to submit their names for consideration. This rule acknowledged the advanced magical education necessary to navigate the tournament's challenges safely. The tasks themselves, while still designed to test magical ability and courage, would be crafted with safety precautions that previous iterations had lacked. Preparations began in earnest. Envision the ministry officials arriving at Hogwarts in the quiet summer months, conferring with Dumbledore in his circular office. The headmaster, with his characteristic blend of wisdom and caution, would have been instrumental in shaping the revived tournament. His insights into magical education and student welfare would have tempered the ministry's enthusiasm with necessary prudence. When September arrived and students returned to Hogwarts, rumors began circulating. The Great Hall buzzed with speculation during the welcome feast as Dumbledore made the grand announcement. The Triwizard tournament would return to Hogwarts that year. One can almost feel the electric excitement that must have coursed through the hall, students whispering to one another, eyes wide with wonder at the prospect of witnessing this legendary competition firsthand. October brought the arrival of the delegations from Beauxbatons and Durmstrang. The grounds of Hogwarts transformed into an international gathering of magical education. Imagine standing among the Hogwarts students as they gathered on the front lawn, watching as a massive powder-blue carriage, drawn by enormous Palomino flying horses, soared through the autumn sky. The carriage landed with a tremendous crash, and from it emerged the delegation from Beauxbatons Academy, led by their headmistress, Madame Olympe Maxime, a woman of remarkable stature and dignity. Not long after, the lake's smooth surface began to churn and bubble, and from its depths rose the magnificent Durmstrang ship, water streaming from its ancient wood, as though it were rising from a shipwreck. Cloaked in furs against the Scottish chill, the Durmstrang students marched up to the castle, led by their headmaster, Igor Karkaroff, a man with a complicated past and shifting loyalties. The Great Hall of Hogwarts had perhaps never hosted such a diverse gathering of magical people. British, French, and Northern European magical traditions converged under its enchanted ceiling. The house tables accommodated guests in a visual representation of international magical cooperation. Beauxbatons students with their light blue robes, adding splashes of color among the Ravenclaws, Durmstrang's crimson presence interspersed with the Slytherins. Central to the revived tournament was the impartial selector of champions, the Goblet of Fire. Picture this ancient wooden cup, rough-hewn and unassuming in appearance, yet brimming with powerful magic, placed in the entrance hall, surrounded by an age line drawn by Dumbledore himself. The goblet awaited the names of potential champions. For 24 hours, students of age could cross the line and submit their names, each hoping to be selected as their school's representative. The selection ceremony itself was a moment of breathless anticipation. The great hall, dimly lit and packed with students from all three schools, fell silent as the goblet's blue-white flames suddenly turned red. Sparks flew, and a tongue of flame shot into the air, ejecting a charred piece of parchment. The name of the Durmstrang champion, Viktor Krum, the famous Quidditch player, would represent his school. Moments later, the goblet flared again, revealing Fleur Delacour as the champion for Beauxbatons. And finally, Cedric Diggory was selected to represent Hogwarts. The three champions, each embodying the best qualities of their respective schools, stood ready to compete for eternal glory and 1,000 galleons prize money. What should have been the conclusion of the selection process was interrupted by an unprecedented event. The Goblet of Fire produced a fourth name, Harry Potter. Despite being underage, and despite the tournament being designed for 3 champions, Harry found himself bound by magical contract to compete alongside the others. This unexpected development would later be revealed as the first step in an elaborate plot orchestrated by Lord Voldemort and his faithful servant. But at the time, it cast a shadow of controversy over the tournament's revival. The tasks themselves were designed to challenge the champions in different ways. The first task involved facing dragons, specifically nesting mother dragons, among the most dangerous creatures in the wizarding world. Each champion was required to retrieve a golden egg, guarded by their assigned dragon. Imagine the spectacle: a stadium constructed on the Hogwarts grounds, filled with cheering students and teachers, as each champion approached their dragon with different strategies: transfiguration, charm work, flying skills, and more. The second task took place in the depths of the Black Lake in February. Each champion had to rescue a person precious to them from the merpeople's village within an hour. This challenge tested not only magical ability, but problem-solving under pressure. The various methods employed, from partial transfiguration to the use of gillyweed to specialized charm work, showcased the diversity of magical education across the three schools. The final task transformed the Quidditch pitch into an enormous maze filled with magical obstacles and creatures. The Triwizard Cup, placed at its center, would grant victory to the first champion who touched it. What began as a competition ended in tragedy when the cup was revealed to be a portkey, transporting Harry Potter and Cedric Diggory to a graveyard where Lord Voldemort awaited. Cedric's murder at the hands of Peter Pettigrew marked a somber end to the tournament's revival. The Triwizard Tournament of 1994 to 1995 did succeed in its goal of fostering international magical cooperation, though perhaps not in the way its organizers had intended. The shared trauma of Cedric's death and the return of Lord Voldemort created bonds between students of different nationalities that transcended mere friendly competition. As Dumbledore noted in his end-of-year speech, every guest in this hall will be welcomed back here at any time, should they wish to come. I say to you all once again, in the light of Lord Voldemort's return, we are only as strong as we are united, as weak as we are divided. The revival of the Triwizard Tournament stands as a complex chapter in modern wizarding history, a well-intentioned attempt to resurrect a cherished tradition that became entangled in the broader conflict between good and evil. Yet perhaps its greatest legacy lies not in the competition itself, but in the connections forged between young witches and wizards of different backgrounds, united in their grief and their determination to stand against the darkness that threatened their world. As you drift towards sleep, consider this: what ancient traditions in your own life might benefit from revival, and what wisdom from the past might guide us through present challenges. Which elements should remain in history, and which carry timeless value that transcends the centuries. Chapter 2. The Dueling Skills of Viktor Krum. The glow of wandlight pierces through the evening mist as we turn our attention to a wizard whose prowess extended far beyond the Quidditch pitch. Though known to many as the youngest professional seeker in the world, Viktor Krum's magical abilities encompassed a mastery of dueling that few have truly appreciated or understood. Tonight, we shall explore the formidable dueling talents of this Durmstrang champion, whose stern demeanor concealed a mind sharp as a spell's precision. Viktor Krum was born to a prominent wizarding family in Bulgaria, a country with a magical tradition that emphasized practical defensive magic and dueling from an early age. While British magical education at Hogwarts balanced theoretical knowledge with practical application, Durmstrang Institute approached magic with a different philosophy entirely. The school, hidden somewhere in the northern reaches of Europe, possibly in Scandinavia or Russia, was known for its rigorous physical conditioning alongside magical training. Imagine a young Viktor, perhaps no more than 11, arriving at Durmstrang for the first time. The castle, less grandiose than Hogwarts, but more fortress-like, would have greeted him with its imposing stone walls. Unlike the relatively comfortable surroundings of the Scottish school, Durmstrang students endured colder conditions and stricter discipline. It was in this environment that Viktor's natural intensity found its perfect channel. Durmstrang's approach to magical education differed significantly from Hogwarts in several key aspects, particularly in its approach to the dark arts. While Hogwarts taught defense against the dark arts, Durmstrang actually taught the dark arts themselves, believing that to properly defend oneself, one must understand the very nature of what one is defending against. This controversial educational philosophy produced graduates with a particular kind of magical knowledge, one that sometimes raised eyebrows in international magical circles, but also created duelists of exceptional capability. The foundations of Viktor's dueling education would have begun with stance and wand work. Durmstrang emphasized the physical aspects of dueling more than many other schools. Students were taught that a duelist's body was as much a weapon as their wand. Proper positioning could mean the difference between landing a spell or being struck by one. Viktor's athletic background served him well in this regard. The same physical discipline that made him an extraordinary seeker translated perfectly to the dueling arena. Picture the training halls of Durmstrang, where students would pair off under the watchful eyes of their professors. Young Viktor would stand with feet carefully positioned, his wand arm extended with precise control. Even in these early days, those who dueled against him noted his exceptional focus, an intensity in his eyes that suggested complete immersion in the magical moment at hand. Viktor's wand movements were characterized by their economy and precision. Where some duelists favored flowery gestures or dramatic flourishes, Krum's approach was minimalist and deadly effective. His spells traveled with remarkable speed, often catching opponents off guard with their swift execution. This efficiency of movement was particularly evident when casting nonverbal spells, a skill at which Viktor excelled from a relatively young age. The Durmstrang curriculum placed heavy emphasis on nonverbal magic, the ability to cast spells without speaking the incantation aloud. This advanced skill, not typically taught until the 6th year at Hogwarts, was introduced much earlier at Durmstrang. By his 4th year, Viktor could reportedly cast most standard combat spells without uttering a word, giving him a significant advantage in dueling situations where the element of surprise was crucial. Viktor's spell repertoire was as disciplined as his casting technique. Rather than accumulating an extensive catalog of esoteric spells, he mastered a core set of offensive and defensive magic to near perfection. His shield charms were particularly noteworthy, described by a visiting wizarding dueling examiner as nearly impenetrable when cast with full intention. These shields had a distinctive blue-silver hue that became something of a signature in his dueling style. On the offensive side, Viktor favored precision over raw power. His stunning spells were not necessarily more powerful than those of other skilled wizards, but they were aimed with such accuracy that they rarely missed their mark. He was known for his ability to target specific points on an opponent's body, a skill that requires exceptional control and understanding of spell dynamics. One of the most distinctive elements of Viktor's dueling style was his footwork. Drawing on the physical discipline instilled by both Quidditch and Durmstrang's physical training regimen, he moved across the dueling platform with a grace that belied his somewhat duck-footed walking gait. This mobility made him an elusive target, particularly in the formal dueling context where space was limited. By his 6th year at Durmstrang, Viktor had developed a reputation as one of the school's premier duelists. He regularly represented his year group in the school's internal dueling competitions, which were held in a grand circular arena within the castle. These competitions were serious affairs at Durmstrang, attended by the entire student body and faculty. The atmosphere was intense, torchlight casting dramatic shadows across the arena as students demonstrated their magical combat skills. It was during one such competition in his 6th year that Viktor first came to the attention of Durmstrang's headmaster, Igor Karkaroff. The story goes that Viktor faced a 7th-year student who had remained undefeated for 2 consecutive years. The older student opened with an aggressive barrage of spells, each one cast with increasing power. Rather than responding with equal aggression, Viktor employed a strategy of controlled defense, allowing his opponent to exhaust himself before launching a precisely timed counteroffensive. 3 spells later, the 7th-year champion lay stunned on the platform, and Viktor Krum had announced himself as a dueling force to be reckoned with. Karkaroff, recognizing Viktor's exceptional talent, took a personal interest in his development. While the headmaster had a questionable past as a former Death Eater, there was no denying his knowledge of combat magic. Under Karkaroff's tutelage, Viktor's dueling style evolved further. The headmaster encouraged him to incorporate elements of Eastern European magical traditions, particularly the Bulgarian emphasis on grounding one's magic through connection to the earth beneath one's feet. This influence manifested in a subtle but significant aspect of Viktor's dueling style. Observers noted that in moments of intense magical exchange, he would press his non-wand foot firmly into the ground, as if drawing power from the earth itself. Whether this had any actual magical effect or was simply a psychological technique remains a topic of debate among dueling analysts, but it became an integral part of his approach to magical combat. By the time Viktor arrived at Hogwarts for the Triwizard tournament in his final year of magical education, he was not only a world-famous Quidditch player, but also an accomplished duelist. Few at Hogwarts recognized this dual talent, so focused were they on his sporting fame. Yet those with a trained eye, particularly the defense against the dark arts teacher Alastor Moody, who was, unbeknownst to all, actually Barty Crouch Jr. in disguise, noticed the way Viktor carried his wand, the alertness in his posture, and the controlled precision of his everyday spellcasting. The Triwizard tournament tasks, while not formal dueling competitions, nonetheless showcased elements of Viktor's combat training. In the first task, his confrontation with the Chinese fireball dragon demonstrated his ability to maintain focus under extreme pressure. Rather than panicking in the face of the dragon's flames, he employed a partial conjunctivitis curse, a precise spell aimed at the dragon's eyes to temporarily blind it. While this strategy had mixed results, the dragon, in its pain, crushed some of its own eggs, costing Viktor points. It nonetheless displayed the targeted spellcasting that characterized his dueling style. The second task perhaps best illustrated Viktor's adaptability in magical situations. Faced with the challenge of retrieving a hostage from the bottom of the Black Lake, he employed a complex piece of self-transfiguration, giving himself a shark's head to breathe underwater. This was not a simple charm like the bubble head used by Cedric Diggory and Fleur de la Cour, but a partial human transfiguration, a branch of magic requiring exceptional wand work and concentration, particularly when performed on oneself. The maze of the third task would have suited Viktor's dueling skills perfectly, requiring, as it did, quick reactions and combat readiness. Unfortunately, the intervention of the disguised Barty Crouch Jr., who placed Viktor under the Imperious Curse, prevented a true demonstration of his abilities. One can only imagine how he might have navigated the maze's challenges had he been in full control of his faculties. After the Triwizard tournament, Viktor returned to Bulgaria, where he continued his professional Quidditch career with the national team. However, he also maintained his dueling practice, occasionally participating in the Eastern European dueling circuit, a semi-professional league that attracts skilled duelists from across the region. In these competitions, Viktor's style continued to evolve, incorporating elements learned during his time at Hogwarts and his experiences in the Triwizard tournament. Those who have faced Viktor on the dueling platform describe an experience unlike confronting any other opponent. One Bulgarian duelist noted, "When you face Krum, it is not just his spells you must counter, but his complete presence. His eyes never leave yours, and you feel as though he is casting with his entire being, not just his wand." This intensity of focus became known as Krum's gaze among the dueling communities of Eastern Europe, a psychological component of dueling that many tried to emulate, but few mastered. Viktor's dueling reputation reached its peak during the general wizarding upheaval that accompanied Lord Voldemort's return to power. While Bulgaria remained somewhat removed from the direct conflict that engulfed Britain, the ripple effects were felt throughout the international wizarding community. Viktor, who had personal connections to those fighting against Voldemort, including his Triwizard tournament competitors, and Hermione Granger, with whom he had maintained correspondence, found himself occasionally drawn into situations requiring magical defense. There are unconfirmed reports that during this period, Viktor was approached by emissaries of Voldemort seeking to recruit international supporters. The exact nature of these encounters remains unclear, but what is known is that Viktor remained firmly independent, neither joining Voldemort's cause nor openly opposing it until the conflict's final stages. This neutrality required its own kind of strength, and occasionally its own kind of magical defense. In the years following the defeat of Voldemort, Viktor continued to balance his Quidditch career with occasional appearances in dueling exhibitions. These events, typically held for charitable causes, allowed him to demonstrate that even as he aged, his dueling skills remained sharp. If anything, his magical combat abilities matured like fine wine, with experience adding subtlety to his already formidable technique. Perhaps the most fascinating aspect of Viktor Krum as a duelist was the contrast between his public and private personas. On the Quidditch pitch, he was a celebrity, admired and adored by fans across the world. In dueling circles, however, he was respected for entirely different reasons: his discipline, his precision, his unwavering focus. This duality reminds us that magical talent often manifests in unexpected ways, and that those we think we know through public accomplishments may possess depths of ability we can scarcely imagine. As the embers in our fireplace begin to dim and the hour grows late, we might reflect on the nature of magical discipline as exemplified by Viktor Krum. In a world where flashy spellwork and dramatic magical effects often capture attention, his approach reminds us of the power and restraint in mastering the fundamentals to perfection rather than seeking ever more exotic magic. What might we accomplish in our own pursuits if we dedicated ourselves to such focused mastery? How might the patient perfection of core skills serve us better than the constant chase for novelty? Chapter 3. The Gift of Parseltongue. Soft whispers seem to circle the room tonight, like secrets passed between ancient walls. Perhaps it is fitting, then, that we turn our attention to one of the most mysterious and misunderstood magical abilities in the wizarding world, the rare gift of speaking to serpents, known as Parseltongue. Imagine, if you will, a language not learned but inherited, passed down through generations like an heirloom of sound. Parseltongue is precisely this, a magical language that cannot be studied from books or taught in classrooms. It manifests as an innate ability, allowing certain witches and wizards to communicate with serpents in their native tongue. To those without this ability, Parseltongue sounds merely like a series of hisses and subtle variations in sibilant sounds. Yet to the rare Parselmouth, these sounds form a complex language, as comprehensible as English or French might be to the rest of us. The origins of Parseltongue are shrouded in the mists of magical history. Ancient magical traditions across the world record instances of serpent speakers, from the snake charmers of India to the priests of certain Mesoamerican civilizations. In European magical tradition, however, the ability became most famously associated with Salazar Slytherin, one of the 4 founders of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Salazar Slytherin lived over 1,000 years ago, during a time when magic was practiced more openly, but also when persecution of witches and wizards by Muggles was increasingly common. Historical records suggest that Slytherin was born in a fen, or marshland, in eastern England, an environment likely teeming with adders and grass snakes. Perhaps it was in these formative surroundings that his natural ability to communicate with serpents first manifested. Slytherin's Parseltongue ability influenced many aspects of his magical legacy. His chosen symbol for Slytherin House was, naturally, a serpent. The entrance to his hidden chamber of secrets could only be opened by a command in Parseltongue. Even his locket, which would later become a vessel for a fragment of Lord Voldemort's soul, was adorned with an ornate sea that resembled a snake. For Salazar Slytherin, the serpent represented cunning and ambition, qualities he prized and sought to instill in students of his house. After Slytherin's departure from Hogwarts, following his falling out with the other founders over the admission of Muggle-born students, the gift of Parseltongue continued through his bloodline. The ability became a defining characteristic of his descendants, who prided themselves on this connection to their illustrious ancestor. Over centuries, the Slytherin line became the Gaunt family, who, despite their declining fortunes and increasing instability due to generations of inbreeding, clung to their Parseltongue ability as proof of their pure-blood supremacy. By the 20th century, the Gaunt family had dwindled to Marvolo Gaunt and his 2 children, Morfin and Merope, living in squalor in a small cottage near Little Hangleton. They were a far cry from the noble wizard their ancestor Salazar had been, yet their ability to speak Parseltongue remained intact, perhaps the last vestige of their once prestigious heritage. Morfin, in particular, was known to use this ability in disturbing ways, conversing with snakes that he nailed to their cottage door as gruesome decorations. Merope Gaunt, despite her family's cruelty toward her, carried this genetic gift as well. When she later bore a son to the Muggle Tom Riddle Sr., after ensnaring him with a love potion, the ability passed to their child, Tom Marvolo Riddle, who would later become Lord Voldemort. Thus, the ancient gift of Salazar Slytherin found its way into the 20th century, carried by a half-blood orphan who would eventually embrace his heritage with terrifying conviction. Young Tom Riddle discovered his Parseltongue ability before he even knew he was a wizard. At the orphanage where he grew up, he found he could communicate with garden snakes, commanding them to frighten other children. This early manifestation of both his magical ability and his inclination toward cruelty foreshadowed the dark path he would later follow. When Albus Dumbledore visited the orphanage to inform 11-year-old Tom that he had been accepted to Hogwarts, the boy mentioned his ability to speak to snakes, already intuiting that this was an unusual power. Dumbledore, one of the few wizards knowledgeable enough to recognize the significance of this revelation, was immediately alerted to the possibility that Tom might be a descendant of Salazar Slytherin. This connection would prove prophetic when, years later, Riddle opened the Chamber of Secrets and released Slytherin's basilisk upon the school. The basilisk itself represents the darkest application of Parseltongue. This monstrous serpent, bred or conjured by Salazar Slytherin himself, could only be controlled by a Parselmoth. Slytherin intended for his heir to use the basilisk to purge the school of those he deemed unworthy to study magic, specifically Muggle-born students. Tom Riddle, embracing what he saw as Slytherin's noble work, used his Parseltongue ability to awaken and direct the basilisk during his 5th year at Hogwarts, resulting in the petrification of several students and, tragically, the death of Myrtle Warren. It was through this unusual chain of events that Harry Potter, born to James and Lily Potter, with no known connection to Salazar Slytherin's bloodline, also became a Parselmoth. When Lord Voldemort attempted to kill infant Harry on that fateful night in Godric's Hollow, the rebounding curse that destroyed Voldemort's body also transferred some of the Dark Lord's powers to Harry, including the ability to speak Parseltongue. This transfer occurred because the killing curse caused a fragment of Voldemort's already fractured soul to latch onto the only living being in the room, Harry himself. Harry's discovery of his Parseltongue ability came during a visit to the London Zoo shortly before his 11th birthday. In a moment that would later gain significance, he inadvertently vanished the glass of a boa constrictor's enclosure after having what seemed to him a perfectly normal conversation with the serpent. Like Tom Riddle before him, Harry had no context for understanding that speaking to snakes was an ability possessed by only a tiny fraction of the wizarding population. The true revelation of Harry's ability came during the Dueling Club in his 2nd year at Hogwarts. When Draco Malfoy conjured a snake that threatened to attack Justin Finch-Fletchley, Harry instinctively commanded the serpent to stop in Parseltongue. To Harry, he was simply shouting, "Leave him alone!" But to everyone else in the Great Hall, including Justin himself, Harry appeared to be encouraging the snake to attack. This incident revealed not only Harry's previously unknown ability, but also the deeply ingrained prejudice against Parselmouths in British wizarding society. The ability had become so thoroughly associated with Salazar Slytherin and the dark arts that many students immediately suspected Harry of being the heir of Slytherin and the one responsible for the recent attacks on Muggle-born students. The fear and suspicion that followed Harry after this revelation demonstrated how powerfully Parseltongue had become linked with dark magic in the public consciousness. Despite this stigma, Harry's Parseltongue ability proved useful on several occasions. Most significantly, it allowed him to enter the Chamber of Secrets and confront both the basilisk and the memory of Tom Riddle preserved in the diary Horcrux. Without this ability, Harry would have been unable to open the chamber and save Ginny Weasley's life. Later, during the search for Voldemort's Horcruxes, Harry used Parseltongue to open Salazar Slytherin's locket and eventually to enter the Chamber of Secrets again to retrieve basilisk fangs capable of destroying Horcruxes. The mechanics of Parseltongue as a magical language remain somewhat mysterious. Unlike human languages, which must be learned through exposure and practice, Parseltongue appears to be an intuitive ability. Harry never consciously knew he was speaking a different language when addressing snakes. To him, it seemed as though the snakes understood English. This suggests that the transition between human language and serpent speech happens at a subconscious level for Parselmouths, perhaps more akin to a magical translation than a conscious code switching. Interestingly, while the ability to speak Parseltongue appears to be innate rather than learned, it is possible for non-Parselmouths to recognize and even reproduce specific Parseltongue phrases through careful study and imitation. Ron Weasley demonstrated this when he mimicked Harry's Parseltongue command to open the Chamber of Secrets during the Battle of Hogwarts. Ron had heard Harry use the phrase multiple times and was able to approximate the sounds closely enough to activate the chamber's entrance. However, this represents mere mimicry of specific sounds rather than true understanding or fluency in the language. The range of serpents that can be communicated with through Parseltongue appears to be quite broad. Harry conversed with a boa constrictor, commanded a conjured snake, and controlled the basilisk, three very different species of serpent. This suggests that Parseltongue may be a universal serpent language, comprehensible to all snake species regardless of their natural habitats or evolutionary distance from one another. Beyond communication, Parseltongue seems to confer a certain influence over serpents. Both Voldemort and Harry were able not just to understand snakes but to direct their actions. This aspect of Parseltongue borders on magical control rather than mere linguistic exchange, implying that the ability may involve a form of subtle mental magic as well as language. After Voldemort's final defeat, Harry discovered that he had lost his ability to speak Parseltongue. When the fragment of Voldemort's soul that had resided within Harry was destroyed, the magical abilities it had conferred, including Parseltongue, vanished with it. This confirms that Harry's ability was indeed borrowed rather than innate, a temporary magical connection to Slytherin's lineage rather than a true genetic inheritance. The loss of this ability marked the end of an era, with Voldemort dead and his bloodline ended, and with Harry no longer carrying a fragment of the Dark Lord's soul. The direct line of Parselmouths descending from Salazar Slytherin appeared to have finally come to an end. Whether the ability continues in other, unknown branches of magical families remains a mystery. Given the secretive nature of those with the ability, often due to its negative associations, it's entirely possible that other Parselmouths exist in the wizarding world, quietly communicating with serpents away from judging eyes. The legacy of Parseltongue in wizarding culture remains complex. For centuries it was viewed with suspicion and fear, associated with dark wizards and sinister intentions. Yet, like many magical abilities, Parseltongue itself is neither inherently good nor evil. It is merely a tool, its moral valence determined by the intentions of the speaker. Harry Potter demonstrated that this supposedly dark ability could be used for heroic purposes, potentially helping to rehabilitate its reputation in post-war wizarding Britain. In other magical cultures around the world, the ability to speak with serpents carries different connotations. In certain Indian magical traditions, serpent speakers are revered as blessed by powerful magical forces. Among indigenous magical communities in parts of the Americas, the ability is seen as a mark of a potential healer or spiritual leader. These varying cultural interpretations remind us that magic, like language itself, is understood through the lens of culture and history rather than absolute moral categories. As our discussion of this rare magical gift draws to a close, consider the power of language itself, how the ability to communicate across boundaries, whether between human cultures or between species, can be used to build understanding or to manipulate. A gift like Parseltongue, rare and misunderstood, serves as a reminder that our abilities, magical or otherwise, gain their meaning from how we choose to use them. In a world where communication often falters even between those who nominally speak the same language, what might we learn from those rare individuals who can bridge the gap between human and serpent understanding? Chapter 4. The Divination Tower. As twilight deepens and stars begin to appear in the velvet sky beyond our windows, it seems an appropriate moment to turn our attention to a place where the heavens are studied with particular intensity. The Divination Tower of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. This mysterious vertical realm, reaching toward the stars yet somehow separate from the daily rhythms of school life below, holds secrets and atmospheres unlike any other part of the ancient castle. The Divination Tower rises from the northern section of Hogwarts, its stone walls weathered by centuries of Scottish winds and rains. Unlike the Astronomy Tower, which stands as the tallest structure at Hogwarts and is open to the elements at its summit, the Divination Tower is enclosed and intimate, designed not for observing celestial bodies directly, but for interpreting their influences through various divinatory arts. To reach the divination classroom at the top of this tower, one must ascend a tightly spiraling staircase, a physical journey that mirrors the mental transition students make as they leave behind the concrete magic of transfiguration and charms for the more abstract and interpretive realm of divination. The circular staircase, with its worn stone steps and walls lined with ancient tapestries depicting seers and prophets from magical history, creates a transitional space. With each step upward, the cool, practical air of the main castle gives way to the warm, heavily perfumed atmosphere of Professor Trelawney's domain. The entrance to the classroom itself is unusual, not a conventional doorway, but a circular trapdoor in the ceiling at the top of the staircase, with a brass plaque identifying it as the classroom of Sybil Trelawney, divination teacher. When classes are in session, a silvery ladder descends from this trapdoor, inviting students to climb into a space that seems designed to disorient and reframe their perceptions. And what a space it is! Imagine emerging through that trapdoor into a circular room unlike any other at Hogwarts, where the Great Hall is grand and open, and the Gryffindor common room warmly homely. The divination classroom is deliberately designed to evoke the atmosphere of an old-fashioned tea shop crossed with a fortune-teller's tent at a country fair. The large circular room is stifling in its warmth, heated by a fire burning with strange blue flames in a copper kettle at the center of the room, filling the air with heavy, sweet perfume that Professor Trelawney claims helps to stimulate the inner eye. The windows, which might have provided relief from this intense atmosphere, are perpetually draped with thick curtains in deep crimson and purple hues, allowing only the most diffused natural light to penetrate. Instead, the room is illuminated by dozens of lamps draped with scarves and shawls in jewel-like colors, casting the entire space in a dim reddish glow that creates both intimacy and a certain dreamlike quality. Shadows gather in corners, and even familiar objects seem slightly transformed in this unusual light. Rather than the long tables and benches found in most Hogwarts classrooms, the divination classroom is furnished with 20 small circular tables surrounded by chintz armchairs and fat little poufs. These create small islands of workspace, encouraging students to focus on their immediate vicinity rather than the class as a whole, a physical arrangement that perhaps mirrors the inward-turning focus that divination requires. Every available surface in the room is covered with objects related to various forms of divination. Shelves line the circular walls, crammed with dusty feathers, stubs of candles, many packs of tattered playing cards, countless silvery crystal balls, and a vast collection of teacups. The overall effect is one of cluttered mysticism, a physical manifestation of the layered and sometimes contradictory systems of divination taught within these walls. The sensory experience of the Divination Tower extends beyond sight. The heavy perfume, a mixture of incense, dried herbs, and tea, creates an olfactory environment that many students find overwhelming at first, but which gradually becomes part of the unique character of divination lessons. The crackling of the blue-flamed fire, the occasional tinkling of crystal ornaments hanging from the ceiling, and Professor Trelawney's own hushed, misty voice create a soundscape entirely different from the clear instructions and incantations heard in other magical classrooms. Even the tactile experience is distinctive. The plush fabric of the armchairs and puffs, the delicate porcelain of teacups used for tessemancy, tea leaf reading, the smooth crystal of the balls used for crystallomancy, and the worn cards used for cartomancy, all engage the sense of touch in ways unique to this discipline. This multi-sensory environment is no accident. Divination, perhaps more than any other magical discipline taught at Hogwarts, relies on altering one's normal state of consciousness, achieving a receptive state in which patterns and meanings can be perceived beyond the obvious. Professor Trelawney, whatever her actual abilities as a seer, understood this principle and created a space that facilitated this transition from ordinary awareness to divinatory receptivity. The Divination Tower houses more than just the classroom. Above it lies Professor Trelawney's private quarters, accessed through a separate, smaller trapdoor in the classroom ceiling. These rooms, rarely seen by students, are said to continue the aesthetic of the classroom below, but with even more pronounced personal touches. More shawls, more crystal ornaments, and shelves of texts on divination that even the Hogwarts library doesn't possess. During Professor Trelawney's tenure, the tower became something of an exclusive domain. Unlike most Hogwarts professors who maintain offices separate from their classrooms, and who can often be found in the staff room or Great Hall, Trelawney rarely left her tower, taking most meals in her rooms and descending to join the school at large only on special occasions. This self-imposed isolation contributed to her mystique, but also reflected her somewhat tenuous position within the Hogwarts faculty, particularly during periods when the validity of divination as a discipline was questioned by her colleagues. The history of the Divination Tower stretches back to the early days of Hogwarts, though not to its founding. Unlike core magical disciplines such as transfiguration and charms, which have been taught continuously since the school's establishment, divination has moved in and out of favor over the centuries. The tower itself is believed to have been constructed during the medieval period, when interest in astrology and other divinatory arts was at its height in both the magical and Muggle worlds. The architecture of the tower reflects this medieval origin. The thick stone walls are pierced by narrow, arched windows, currently obscured by Professor Trelawney's heavy curtains, but originally designed to frame specific celestial alignments at different times of the year. The ribbed ceiling of the classroom rises to a central point, from which hangs a model of the solar system that slowly rotates, tracking the actual positions of the planets, a magical tool for astrological divination that predates Professor Trelawney's tenure by many centuries. Over the years, different divination professors have left their mark on the tower. Some emphasized astrology, turning the classroom into something closer to a planetarium. Others focused on crystallomancy, filling the space with crystal balls of various sizes. One 19th-century professor was known for her work with pyromancy, divination by flames, and installed the special fireplace that now holds Professor Trelawney's blue-flamed kettle. Each teacher has added layers to the room's character, while maintaining its essential nature as a space set apart from the practical magic taught elsewhere in the castle. This sense of separation extends to the tower's place in student life. Unlike the astronomy tower, which all students visit regularly for practical astronomy lessons, the Divination Tower is experienced only by those who elect to study this optional subject, typically beginning in their third year. For many students, their first ascent of that spiral staircase marks a rite of passage, entry into a more specialized and esoteric branch of magical education. The tower has witnessed countless student experiences over the centuries. Generations have gathered around those small tables, peering into teacups and crystal balls, shuffling cards and casting runes. Some approached these lessons with skepticism, others with earnest belief in the possibility of glimpsing the future. Many found the warm, perfumed air inducing drowsiness rather than mystical insight, a phenomenon Professor Trelawney herself attributed to the overwhelming vibrations of futurity, rather than the more prosaic explanation of inadequate ventilation. Despite the skepticism often directed at divination as a discipline, the Divination Tower has occasionally been the site of genuine magical significance. It was here, during what should have been a routine job interview, that Sybil Trelawney delivered the prophecy concerning Harry Potter and Lord Voldemort, a true seer's pronouncement that would shape the course of wizarding history. This moment of authentic divination, witnessed only by Albus Dumbledore, stands in stark contrast to the often theatrical predictions made in the same space during regular classes. The tower also played a role during the brief tenure of the centaur Firenze as a divination teacher. When Professor Umbridge dismissed Trelawney during her reign as Hogwarts High Inquisitor, Dumbledore appointed Firenze in her place. Unable to climb the silvery ladder to the traditional classroom with his equine lower body, Firenze taught in a ground-floor classroom specially modified to resemble a forest clearing. However, the Divination Tower remained Trelawney's residence, a sanctuary during her period of professional humiliation. After Umbridge's departure from Hogwarts, an unusual arrangement was established wherein Trelawney and Firenze shared divination teaching duties. Trelawney resumed classes in her tower classroom, while Firenze continued to teach in his forest-like ground-floor space. This arrangement highlighted the different approaches to divination found in human and centaur traditions, Trelawney's more conventional Western methods contrasting with Firenze's astronomically based centaur divination, which rejected many human interpretative frameworks. The Divination Tower witnessed the Battle of Hogwarts, like all parts of the castle, though it was not a major site of conflict. Its height and relatively isolated position may have spared it the worst of the fighting. After the reconstruction of Hogwarts following the battle, the tower resumed its function as the center of divination education, with Professor Trelawney continuing in her position. For visitors to Hogwarts, the Divination Tower remains one of the more mysterious spaces in the castle. Unlike the Great Hall or the major courtyards, it is not on the standard tour route and retains something of its secluded character. Those who do visit often report a lingering sense of the tower's unique atmosphere, the residual scent of incense and herbs, a certain quality to the light filtering through those heavy curtains, and perhaps, if one is sensitive to such things, the accumulated energy of countless attempts to pierce the veil of time and glimpse what lies beyond the present moment. As night deepens around us and our own thoughts turn toward dreams, those personal divinations of the sleeping mind, perhaps we might reflect on the nature of foreknowledge itself. What would change in your own life if you could glimpse what lies ahead? Would the comfort of certainty outweigh the loss of surprise and discovery, like students emerging from the heavily perfumed air of the Divination Tower into the clear corridors of Hogwarts below? Perhaps we sometimes need to return from musings on what might be to engage fully with what is, finding magic in the present moment rather than in predictions of moments yet to come. Chapter 5. The creation of self-shuffling playing cards. The soft whisper of cards sliding against one another fills the room as we turn our attention to one of the most delightful yet often overlooked magical inventions in the wizarding world. In the gentle glow of our evening fire, let us explore the curious history and enchanting magic behind self-shuffling playing cards, those lively rectangular companions that have entertained generations of witches and wizards through long winter evenings and lazy summer afternoons. Unlike the dramatic magic of dueling or the practical enchantments of housekeeping, self-shuffling playing cards represent the playful side of magical innovation, the desire to add wonder and convenience even to leisure activities. To fully appreciate these animated decks, we must first understand their origins in both Muggle and magical history. Playing cards themselves have ancient roots in the Muggle world, with earliest examples appearing in 9th century China before making their way to Europe in the 14th century. The wizarding community, ever observant of Muggle inventions with potential for magical improvement, quickly adopted playing cards for their own entertainment. By the 15th century, wizarding card makers were already enchanting their creations, though these early magical enhancements were limited to moving illustrations rather than the functional animations that would come later. Picture a medieval wizarding household, where a deck of hand-painted cards might show knights that actually brandished their swords or queens who adjusted their crowns with delicate painted fingers. These animated illustrations delighted players, but did nothing to address the mundane task of shuffling, a surprisingly complex physical manipulation that, like many activities requiring dexterity, often proved challenging after several rounds of oak-matured mead or fire whiskey. The first documented attempt to create truly self-shuffling cards is attributed to Augustina Shovelar, a 16th-century Welsh witch with a passion for card games and a frustration with her own poor shuffling technique. Shovelar, who ran a small apothecary in Cardiff, was known for hosting weekly exploding snap tournaments that attracted witches and wizards from throughout South Wales. As the story goes, after one particularly competitive evening when accusations of inadequate shuffling threatened to spoil the gathering's conviviality, Shovelar declared there must be a magical solution. Over the following months, Shovelar experimented with various enchantments on her worn deck of cards. Ear discouraging, one spell caused the cards to shuffle so violently they scattered across the room, another made them stick together permanently, and a third imbued them with an unfortunate tendency to insult the player's shuffling abilities in squeaky but distinctly audible voices. The breakthrough came when Shovelar approached the problem not as a single enchantment, but as a harmonized set of charms working in concert. First, she applied a modified levitation charm to each card individually, calibrated to activate only when the deck was tapped in a specific rhythm. Then she added a sequencing spell that ensured the cards would rise one after another, rather than all at once. Finally, she incorporated a pattern recognition charm that allowed the cards to interlace with each other in the complex weave that constitutes a proper shuffle. Imagine Augustina in her workroom above the apothecary, windows open to the Welsh spring air, meticulously enchanting each card by wandlight. The process was exacting. Each card required the same precise combination of spells, applied with identical intensity, to ensure the deck would shuffle evenly without favoring certain cards over others. Contemporary accounts suggest it took Shovelar nearly 3 weeks to complete the first functional deck of self-shuffling cards. The debut of these cards at her next exploding snap gathering caused a sensation. When Shovelar tapped the deck 3 times with her wand, the cards rose into the air, separated, and performed a perfect riffle shuffle before settling back into a neat stack. Her fellow players were so impressed that several commissioned their own enchanted decks, beginning what would become a thriving magical enterprise for the Welsh witch. Word of Shovelar's innovation spread through wizarding Britain and beyond. By the early 17th century, self-shuffling capabilities had become a standard feature of high-quality wizarding playing cards. The basic enchantment was refined by subsequent card makers, who discovered ways to make the animation smoother and more reliable, while reducing the magical energy required to sustain it. A significant improvement came from the renowned Italian magical artificer Cosimo Cardano in 1623. Cardano, himself descended from a Muggle mathematician with an interest in games of chance, developed a modification to Shovelar's original charm sequence that allowed the cards to recognize when they'd been adequately randomized. This prevented the common problem of cards continuing to shuffle indefinitely if the cancellation tap was not performed correctly, an issue that had resulted in more than a few decks shuffling themselves to tatters when left unattended. The enchantment of self-shuffling cards involves several magical principles that make it more complex than it might initially appear. First, there is the challenge of imbuing inanimate objects with a form of situational awareness. The cards must know when they are part of a complete deck and when shuffling is required. This falls under the branch of magic concerned with object sentience, similar to but less advanced than the enchantments used in wizard chess pieces or the sorting hat. Second, there is the intricate charm work that allows the cards to move in coordinated patterns without human guidance. This requires elements of both levitation and animation spells, carefully balanced to prevent either excessive force, leading to cards shooting across rooms, or insufficient energy, resulting in sluggish, incomplete shuffles. Third, there is the durability enchantment necessary to protect the physical cards from damage during repeated magical manipulations. Standard paper or cardstock would quickly fray and tear under the stress of regular self-shuffling, so wizarding cards are typically imbued with resistance to bending, tearing, and wear, though these protections are not absolute, as any owner of a well-loved ancient deck can attest. The manufacturing process for self-shuffling cards evolved over the centuries. By the early 1800s, most wizarding playing cards were produced in specialized workshops where teams of charm crafters worked in coordinated sequences. One might apply the basic movement enchantments, another the durability charms, and a third the animation spells for the illustrations. Quality control was essential, as improperly enchanted cards could exhibit aberrant behaviors, shuffling at inappropriate moments, moving sluggishly, or in some documented cases, developing peculiar preferences for certain arrangements. Different regions of the wizarding world developed their own variations on self-shuffling cards. French magical card makers became known for decks that shuffled with particular elegance, the cards performing graceful aerial patterns before reordering themselves. German wizarding cards were prized for their exceptional durability and precision, while Spanish magical cards often incorporated subtle sound elements, a gentle flamenco rhythm accompanying the shuffling motion. In Britain, the most prestigious manufacturer of self-shuffling cards by the 19th century was Wimbledon and Watkins, established in 1795 in a discreet workshop off Diagon Alley. Their premium decks, featuring hand-painted illustrations and exceptionally smooth shuffling charms, were favored by well-to-do wizarding families and became traditional gifts for a wizard or witch's 17th birthday. A complete Wimbledon and Watkins deck from their golden period, 1820 to 1875, is now a prized collector's item, with particularly fine examples displayed in the Museum of Wizarding Artifacts in London. The mass production of self-shuffling cards began in earnest during the late 19th century, coinciding with similar industrialization in the Muggle world. The venerable wizarding games manufacturer Everens Entertainments developed a process for applying standardized enchantments to large batches of cards, making self-shuffling decks affordable for average wizarding households for the first time. Their standard shufflers became a common sight in wizarding homes throughout Britain and its magical colonies. By the time Harry Potter attended Hogwarts in the 1990s, self-shuffling cards were such a commonplace magical item that they rarely elicited comment or explanation. They could be purchased at magical game shops like Gambol and Japes, or ordered through Owl Post from Everend's catalog. Different grades remained available, from basic self-shuffling decks affordable to students to luxury versions with advanced features and artistic illustrations. These cards found their way into many aspects of wizarding leisure. They were essential equipment for games like Exploding Snap, where their ability to quickly reset after explosions was particularly valued, and standard wizarding card games, adapted from Muggle variants like poker, whist, and rummy. During the long evenings in the Gryffindor common room, or the tedious hours of history of magic lessons, the soft sound of self-shuffling cards would often be heard as students entertained themselves. The enchantment of self-shuffling cards also served as an entry point for many young witches and wizards interested in the field of magical artifice, the creation of enchanted objects. The principles involved, while complex enough to be interesting, were not so dangerous as to discourage experimentation. Many future wand makers and enchanted object specialists began their careers by attempting to modify or improve upon standard self-shuffling charms. One such innovator was Wilkie Witherwind, who as a Hogwarts student in the 1970s developed a variation that allowed the cards to deal themselves to a specified number of players in addition to shuffling. His self-dealing shufflers won the school's Magical Innovation Prize and eventually led to a successful career, creating a variety of enchanted gaming equipment. The most advanced self-shuffling cards available by the turn of the 21st century incorporated multiple enhancements beyond basic shuffling capabilities. Premium decks might include cheater detection charms that glowed when someone attempted to magically or physically manipulate the deck unfairly. Voice recognition enchant hints that responded to verbal commands like shuffle, deal, or collect. Memory features that could recall and reproduce specific famous hands from historical card games. Tutorial capabilities that would arrange themselves to demonstrate rules and strategies for beginners. Temperature regulation spells that kept the cards comfortable to hold even in extreme weather conditions. These sophisticated enchantments transformed what began as a simple convenience into multifunctional magical objects that combined entertainment with practical utility. The self-shuffling card represented a perfect example of how the wizarding world adapted and enhanced everyday items with magic that was both useful and delightful. For Muggle-born students entering the wizarding world, self-shuffling cards often represented one of the smaller but more charming discoveries about their new reality. Unlike dramatic magical phenomena such as moving staircases or talking portraits, these enchanted decks demonstrated how thoroughly magic was integrated into even the most casual aspects of wizarding life. The humble self-shuffling card also illustrates an important principle of magical innovation, that the most enduring enchanted objects are often those that enhance everyday experiences rather than those that perform spectacular but rarely needed functions. Just as the wizarding community embraced self-stirring cauldrons and self-knitting needles, they welcomed self-shuffling cards as magical solutions to minor inconveniences, adding both efficiency and a touch of wonder to ordinary activities. As our evening grows late and the fire burns lower, we might reflect on how these animated rectangles of enchanted cardstock connect to broader themes in wizarding culture. The self-shuffling card reminds us that magic in the wizarding world is not reserved solely for matters of great importance or moments of crisis. It permeates every aspect of daily life, bringing convenience, beauty, and joy to the mundane. Perhaps, too, there is something to be learned from the way these cards dance and weave through the air in their shuffling ritual. A reminder that sometimes the most satisfying magic is found not in dominance or control, but in creating patterns of harmony and balance. As you drift towards sleep, imagine a deck of wizarding cards performing their quiet ballet above a table, each card finding its new place in a sequence that is both random and perfect in its unexpectedness. What patterns might we discover in our own lives if we allowed ourselves the freedom to reshuffle and find new arrangements of the familiar? Chapter 6. The history of the Quidditch World Cup. The crackling of distant cheers seems to echo through time as we turn our attention to perhaps the most spectacular sporting event in the wizarding world. As moonlight spills across ancient trophies and faded photographs of triumphant teams, let us explore the rich and sometimes tumultuous history of the Quidditch World Cup, a tournament that has united and divided nations, created legends, and provided some of the most breathtaking displays of magical sport ever witnessed. Long before the first official World Cup, Quidditch had already established itself as the preeminent wizarding sport. From its humble origins in Quidditch Marsh in the 11th century, the game steadily evolved, with its rules standardized by the 13th century. By the 14th century, Quidditch matches between villages and towns had become common throughout Britain and had spread to continental Europe. International matches soon followed, with records indicating a fiercely contested game between Flanders and France in 1402 that endured for 7 days. As international play became more common, witches and wizards began to envision a grander stage for the sport they loved, a tournament that would definitively determine which nation could claim supremacy in the increasingly popular game. The idea of a World Cup began to take shape, but it would require organization and governance that the wizarding world had not yet developed for sporting matters. The breakthrough came in 1473 with the formation of the International Association of Quidditch. This body, comprised of representatives from magical governments across Europe, established not only the first comprehensive set of Quidditch fouls, all 700 of them, but also created the framework for regular international competition. The seeds of the World Cup had been planted, though it would be another century before they would fully bloom. The first officially recognized Quidditch World Cup tournament was held in 1473, coinciding with the formation of the International Association of Quidditch. The tournament was a far more modest affair than the spectacle we know today. Only European teams participated, with representations from England, Scotland, France, Germany, Italy, Norway, Sweden, and Flanders. The matches were played on a rudimentary pitch in central France, with minimal facilities for spectators and participants alike. Imagine the scene: a clearing in a French forest, enchanted to repel Muggle attention, with wooden stands hastily constructed around a roughly oval playing area. Players wore leather protective gear and rode broomsticks that would seem painfully primitive by modern standards, heavy, slow, and prone to splintering in sharp turns. Yet the passion for the game burned as brightly then as it would in centuries to come. The inaugural tournament was won by Transylvania, whose team demonstrated remarkable coordination in their Hawkshead attacking formation, a strategy they had developed and perfected in relative isolation. Their seeker, Vlad Dracul, an ancestor of the infamous vampire Count Dracula, caught the snitch after a grueling 4-hour final match against France, securing a 180-30 victory and the first World Cup trophy, a modest silver cup enchanted to emit blue and silver sparks when touched by the winning captain. The early World Cup tournaments were held irregularly, sometimes with gaps of several decades between competitions. This inconsistency reflected the challenges of international magical cooperation in an era before standardized portkeys, and when tensions between wizarding governments often mirrored or exceeded those of their Muggle counterparts. The tournament of 1506, for instance, was abruptly cancelled when the host nation's magical congress was temporarily overthrown during a Goblin rebellion. By the 17th century, the Quidditch World Cup had established a pattern of being held every 4 years, though this schedule was still frequently interrupted by magical conflicts, particularly the giant wars of the 1590s and the Goblin rebellions that persisted throughout the 17th century. The tournament of 1662 is particularly notable for being completed, despite a Hungarian horntail dragon breaking loose from a nearby reservation and setting fire to all the stadium's wooden stands during the semi-final match between Portugal and China. The Chinese team, showing remarkable presence of mind, temporarily abandoned the match to assist in subduing the dragon, an act of sportsmanship that earned them the newly created Tournament Noble Play Award, despite their subsequent loss to Portugal when play resumed. The 18th century brought greater stability to the World Cup, aided by improved international magical relations following the implementation of the International Statute of Secrecy in 1692. With the wizarding world now more formally separated from Muggle society, magical sporting events could be organized with less concern for exposure. The tournament format expanded to include preliminary qualifying rounds, allowing more nations to participate in the quest for the cup. This era also saw the rise of the first truly dominant Quidditch nations. England, France, and the Scandinavian countries had performed well in the early tournaments, but they were now joined by new powerhouses. Uganda emerged as a formidable competitor, winning the cup in 1722 and again in 1746. Their innovative use of the reverse pass, a technique now common but then revolutionary, transformed offensive play throughout the sport. Japan's entrance into international Quidditch competition in the mid-18th century similarly changed the game. The Japanese team introduced lighter, more maneuverable broomsticks and emphasized seeker play to a degree previously unseen. Their seekers trained in specialized techniques for tracking and catching the snitch, including the now famous tsunami spiral. a disorienting vertical climbing maneuver followed by a sudden diving attack. The 19th century ushered in what many Quidditch historians consider the first golden age of the World Cup. The tournament was now a firmly established quadrennial event with consistent qualifying procedures and an expanding global reach. Teams from the Americas, Africa, Asia, and Oceania regularly competed, transforming what had begun as a primarily European affair into a truly global spectacle. This period coincided with significant advances in broomstick technology and stadium design. The introduction of the Oakshaft 79 in 1879 provided players with a broomstick specifically designed for the rigors of long-distance sport rather than mere transportation. The quality of play improved dramatically as a result, with matches showcasing aerial maneuvers that would have been impossible on earlier models. Stadium facilities evolved from simple wooden stands to more elaborate structures with specialized areas for officials, press, and dignitaries. Magical protections became more sophisticated, allowing tournaments to be held in increasingly populous areas without risking exposure to the Muggle world. The 1877 tournament, hosted by Egypt, featured the first fully enclosed magical stadium with a massive dome that appeared to Muggle observers as a natural rock formation, but contained a playing area and seating for over 10,000 spectators. The United States emerged as a Quidditch power during this period, winning their first World Cup in 1894, with a team built around legendary chaser Maximus Brankovic II, whose scoring record of 23 goals in a single match stood unbroken for nearly a century. The U.S. victory in the final against China was witnessed by a then-record crowd of 18,000, packed into a magically expanded stadium outside Boston that had been disguised as an abandoned shipyard. The early 20th century brought both evolution and disruption to the Quidditch World Cup. The tournament scheduled for 1914 was cancelled due to the outbreak of the First World War. While the conflict was primarily a Muggle affair, its global scale inevitably affected the wizarding community, with many magical governments diverting resources to covertly protect their Muggle populations or magical landmarks from collateral damage. The 1922 tournament, the first held after the war, became known as the Tournament of Hope, symbolizing the wizarding world's return to normalcy. Hosted by Spain, it featured 24 nations and was won by Sweden in an emotional final against Brazil. The Swedish seeker, Ingrid Svensson, dedicated the victory to her brother, a wizard who had died while secretly using magic to save Muggle soldiers trapped in no man's land during the war. The 1930s brought technical innovations that transformed how the World Cup was experienced by fans. The development of the self-commentating quill allowed play-by-play accounts to be simultaneously transcribed and distributed throughout the wizarding world, bringing the excitement of matches to those unable to attend in person. The Wizarding Wireless Network, established in 1933, broadcast the 1934 World Cup final between the United States and Poland to an estimated audience of 10 million listeners across the globe. The 1942 and 1946 tournaments were cancelled due to the Second World War and its immediate aftermath. The wizarding world, still recovering from Grindelwald's reign of terror that had roughly coincided with the Muggle conflict, did not resume the World Cup until 1950, when it was held in a remote region of Canada. This tournament, won by Italy in a close final against Argentina, was notable for its subdued atmosphere and enhanced security measures, a reflection of the lingering tensions in the international magical community. The second half of the 20th century saw the Quidditch World Cup evolve into the spectacular event familiar to modern wizarding society. Broomstick technology advanced rapidly, with the introduction of the Nimbus series, and eventually the Firebolt revolutionizing the speed and maneuverability available to players. Specialized training programs for national teams became more sophisticated, with countries like Bulgaria and Ireland investing heavily in identifying and developing young talent. The 1966 World Cup final between Australia and Armenia remains one of the most controversial in the tournament's history. The match, which lasted for 3 days and 7 hours, ended when the Armenian seeker, Yusef Darbinian, appeared to catch the snitch after a spectacular diving feint. However, the Australian team immediately protested, claiming the snitch had been enchanted to favor the Armenian seeker. After 17 hours of closed-door deliberations, the International Association of Quidditch ruled in favor of Armenia, but the controversy led to the introduction of stronger anti-tampering measures for all equipment used in subsequent tournaments. The 1970s and 1980s were dominated by African teams, with Uganda, Nigeria, and Tanzania each claiming the cup at least once during this period. Their fast-paced, physically aggressive style of play forced other nations to adapt or be left behind. The European powers, particularly England and France, struggled during these decades, failing to advance beyond the quarterfinals until France's resurgence in the 1990s. The 1994 Quidditch World Cup, held in Britain, represents perhaps the most thoroughly documented tournament in the event's history, owing to its unfortunate conclusion. The final, a thrilling match between Ireland and Bulgaria, showcased Quidditch at its highest level. Ireland's championship-winning team featured a nearly perfect Hawkshead attacking formation, executed by chasers Troy, Mullet, and Moran, while Bulgaria relied heavily on the transcendent talent of seeker Viktor Krum. The match itself was a tactical masterpiece, with Ireland building an insurmountable lead through superior chaser play, despite Krum's eventual capture of the snitch, a rare instance of the team catching the snitch still losing the match. The final score of 170-160 in favor of Ireland reflected both the Irish chasers' dominance and Krum's decision to end the match on his terms, when victory had become impossible. Unfortunately, this brilliant sporting display was overshadowed by the events that followed. The appearance of the Dark Mark, Lord Voldemort's symbol, and the accompanying violence perpetrated by Death Eaters in the campgrounds surrounding the stadium cast a pall over what should have been a celebration of Quidditch at its finest. The incident served as an ominous foreshadowing of Voldemort's return and the dark period that would follow for the wizarding world. The subsequent World Cup tournaments reflect the resilience of the wizarding community. The 1998 competition, held just months after Voldemort's final defeat, became a symbol of recovery and unity. An unprecedented 46 nations participated in the qualifying rounds, with Senegal eventually claiming the cup after defeating Cuba in the final. The Senegalese victory celebration lasted for 7 days and was said to have been so joyous that several Muggle-repelling charms failed due to the intensity of the magical happiness generated. Beyond the competition itself, the World Cup has long served important cultural and diplomatic functions in the wizarding world. The tournament provides a rare opportunity for large-scale international gathering, facilitating exchange of ideas and magical practices that might otherwise remain regionally isolated. Many significant magical cooperation agreements have been negotiated in the margins of World Cup tournaments, including the landmark 1884 international ban on dueling, which was signed during the quarter-final round of that year's tournament in Peru. The economic impact of hosting the World Cup is substantial. Host nations typically experience a significant boost to their magical economies, with businesses from wand makers to potion suppliers benefiting from the influx of international visitors. The creation of portkey hubs, flu network expansions, and temporary accommodation facilities generates employment and often leaves lasting magical infrastructure improvements after the tournament concludes. Security arrangements for the modern Quidditch World Cup represent some of the most complex magic routinely performed. The challenge of creating a space that can safely accommodate up to 100,000 spectators, completely hidden from Muggle detection, requires cooperation between experts in concealment charms, space extension enchantments, Muggle-repelling spells, and magical law enforcement. The Department of Magical Games and Sports typically begins coordination with the host nation's magical government at least 2 years before each tournament. The cultural significance of the Quidditch World Cup extends beyond the matches themselves. The tournament has inspired countless books, including the best-selling Chasing Victory, A History of the Quidditch World Cup by Kenilworthy Wisp, and even a popular wizarding opera, The Seeker's Sorrow, based on the tragic story of Brazilian seeker José Barbosa, who caught the snitch in the 1958 final, only to discover his father had died of a heart attack in the stands moments earlier. For the average witch or wizard, attending a World Cup final is often a once-in-a-lifetime experience. Tickets are highly coveted, with the best seats sometimes changing hands for thousands of galleons. Many wizarding families save for years to afford the trip, often making it a multi-generational outing where grandparents, parents, and children share the experience across age boundaries. As our exploration of the Quidditch World Cup draws to a close, we can appreciate how this remarkable sporting event mirrors the broader history of the wizarding world itself, evolving from humble European beginnings to global significance, weathering wars and dark periods, and ultimately serving as a celebration of the values that unite magical people across national boundaries. The tournament showcases not just athletic excellence, but the joy of magic itself, expressed through the beautiful aerial ballet that is Quidditch played at its highest level. As you drift towards sleep, perhaps you might wonder, which nation would you cheer for in the next Quidditch World Cup? And what would draw you to their style of play? Would you marvel more at the tactical precision of a well-executed Porskoff ploy? Or would you hold your breath, waiting for that golden glimmer that signals the snitch and the drama of the Seeker's ultimate challenge? Chapter 7. The Administrative Career of Barty Crouch Sr. The evening shadows lengthen as we turn our contemplation to a wizard whose life embodied both remarkable achievement and profound tragedy. In the measured tick of a meticulously maintained pocket watch and the rustle of perfectly organized parchment, we find the essence of Bartemius Crouch Sr., a man whose administrative brilliance was matched only by the personal calamity that would ultimately define his legacy. Bartemius Barty Crouch was born in the early 20th century to a prestigious pure-blood wizarding family. The Crouch name carried significant weight in magical circles, with ancestors having served the Ministry of Magic since its formation in the 17th century. Young Barty was raised with an acute awareness of this heritage and the expectations it placed upon him. From his earliest days at Hogwarts, where he was sorted into an unrecorded house, though many speculate it was Ravenclaw, given his intellectual prowess, or possibly Slytherin, considering his ambition, Crouch demonstrated the exacting standards and unwavering commitment to rules that would characterize his later career. Imagine a young Barty Crouch in the Hogwarts library, his parchments arranged in perfect alignment, his quills stored by size and condition, his academic schedule planned to the minute. Even as a student, he showed little tolerance for rule-breaking or shortcuts, reportedly serving as a prefect who neither gave nor expected leniency. His academic achievements were impeccable, 12 new T.S., according to some accounts, all with outstanding marks. Upon graduating from Hogwarts, Crouch entered the Ministry of Magic with clear ambitions. The precise nature of his early positions is not well documented, but records suggest he began in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, the largest and perhaps most powerful department within the ministry. His rise through the ranks was steady and unremarkable only in its predictability. Colleagues from this period describe a young wizard of impressive magical ability, but more notably, of unparalleled organizational skill and administrative efficiency. The wizarding workplace that Crouch entered was still operating on systems largely unchanged since Victorian times. Interdepartmental memos were delivered by enchanted paper airplanes that often went astray. Filing systems relied heavily on memory charms that occasionally failed, and scheduling of international magical cooperation efforts frequently suffered from time zone confusion. Into this environment, Crouch brought a near-revolutionary attention to procedural detail. Within a decade of joining the ministry, Crouch had implemented a standardized system for tracking magical law cases that dramatically reduced the backlog of minor infractions awaiting judgment. His method, involving a complex but intuitive color-coding system and self-updating reference numbers, remained in use for decades afterward. This early success brought him to the attention of senior ministry officials and accelerated his rise through the departmental hierarchy. By the late 1960s, Crouch had reached the position of head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, a remarkable achievement for a wizard still in his prime, and a platform from which many had launched successful campaigns for Minister of Magic. From this influential office, Crouch implemented more sweeping reforms, particularly in the areas of international magical security cooperation and the prosecution of those who violated serious wizarding laws. It was during this period that Crouch's personal style became more pronounced and, to some, problematic. His perfectionism extended beyond his work to encompass his appearance and demeanor. He was invariably dressed in impeccably tailored robes, his toothbrush mustache precisely trimmed, his parting razor straight. This fastidiousness extended to his speech, formal, precise, and often lacking the warmth that facilitated easy diplomatic relations. While some international magical law enforcement officials found his directness refreshing, others were put off by what they perceived as rigidity. Crouch's home life during these professionally successful years centered around his wife, a quiet witch about whom little is recorded, and their son, Bartemius Crouch Jr. By all accounts, the elder Crouch was frequently absent from home, his dedication to his ministry work, leaving little time for family matters. The consequences of this parental absence would later prove catastrophic, though at the time it seemed merely the expected sacrifice of a wizard destined for the highest office in magical Britain. The trajectory of Crouch's career changed dramatically with the first rise of Lord Voldemort in the 1970s. As the wizarding world descended into terror and chaos, the Department of Magical Law Enforcement found itself at the forefront of the battle against the Death Eaters. For Crouch, this crisis represented both a profound challenge and, more calculatingly, an opportunity to demonstrate the kind of decisive leadership that might propel him to the position of Minister of Magic. Picture the ministry during this dark period, corridors once bustling with everyday magical administration, now tense with security measures, departments working around the clock to counter Death Eater attacks. The Aurora office transformed from a peacekeeping force to the front line of what amounted to a wizarding war. At the center of this storm stood Barty Crouch, his naturally authoritarian tendencies finding their perfect expression in crisis management. Crouch's approach to combating the Death Eaters was characterized by an escalating severity that reflected both the worsening situation and his own hardening resolve. In the early stages of the conflict, he adhered strictly to established legal procedures, but as the Death Eaters grew more violent and their numbers increased, Crouch implemented a series of controversial policies that would forever alter his legacy. Most notorious among these was his authorization for Aurors to use unforgivable curses against suspected Death Eaters, a decision that effectively militarized magical law enforcement in a manner unprecedented in modern wizarding history. "They're using unforgivables against us," Crouch reportedly told the Wizengamot during the debate over this policy. "We must respond in kind or accept defeat." This authorization represented a profound philosophical shift in ministry policy. The unforgivable curses Imperius, Cruciatus, and Avada Kedavra had been classified as unforgivable precisely because they were deemed too terrible for any justifiable use. By sanctioning their deployment by Aurors, Crouch crossed a line that many in the wizarding community found deeply troubling, even in the context of the fight against Voldemort. Beyond this most controversial decision, Crouch implemented other measures that reflected his increasingly draconian approach. Suspects could be held without trial for extended periods, homes could be searched on minimal evidence, and intelligence-gathering methods previously considered unethical became standard practice. For those who lived through this period, the ministry under Crouch's influence came to feel almost as oppressive as the threat it was fighting. A sentiment expressed by Sirius Black years later, when he noted that Crouch's principles became more and more questionable as the war progressed. Yet, despite the moral ambiguities of his methods, Crouch's approach produced results. Death Eater operations were disrupted, key figures in Voldemort's inner circle were captured, and gradually, the tide of the conflict appeared to turn. By 1980, Crouch was widely regarded as the heir apparent to the position of Minister of Magic, with polls indicating overwhelming public support for his ascension once the crisis had passed. Imagine Barty Crouch during this period of his greatest influence, striding through the ministry atrium, junior officials scattering before him, his reputation for both brilliance and mercilessness preceding him like a chill in the air. His mustache had by now developed streaks of gray, but his posture remained ramrod straight, his gaze unflinching. He had sacrificed much for his position: family connections, the nuances of friendship, perhaps even certain moral principles, but the prize of the minister's office seemed within his grasp. The abrupt end of the First Wizarding War, brought about by Voldemort's mysterious defeat at Godric's Hollow, should have been the crowning moment of Crouch's career. In the jubilant aftermath, with the wizarding world celebrating the fall of the Dark Lord, Crouch was positioned to transition from wartime administrator to peacetime leader. The public largely credited the ministry's harsh measures, implemented under his direction, with having weakened Voldemort's forces sufficiently for his eventual fall. What happened instead stands as one of the most dramatic reversals of fortune in modern wizarding political history. Just as Crouch appeared poised to claim the minister's position, catastrophe struck in the most personal possible form. His only son, Barty Crouch Jr., was implicated in one of the most shocking Death Eater crimes of the post-war period: the torture of Frank and Alice Longbottom, two highly respected Aurors, using the Cruciatus Curse until they lost their sanity. The younger Crouch was arrested alongside known Death Eaters Bellatrix, Rodolphus, and Rabistan Lestrange. For the elder Crouch, this development was more than a family tragedy. It was a devastating public humiliation that struck at the very core of his identity as a champion of magical law and order. The man who had authorized Aurors to use unforgivable curses against Death Eaters now found his own son accused of using exactly such a curse in one of the conflict's most horrific crimes. Crouch's response to this situation reveals much about his character. Rather than recusing himself from his son's trial, he chose to preside over it personally, a decision that even his political supporters found difficult to defend. In what must have been an excruciating personal and public moment, Crouch conducted his son's trial with the same cold severity he had shown to all other Death Eater suspects. Witnesses to that trial describe a courtroom scene of extraordinary tension. The elder Crouch, seated in the central chair of the Wizengamot, his face mask-like in its rigid control, his wife pale and trembling in the gallery, and their son chained to a chair in the center of the room, alternating between terrified pleas for mercy and wild-eyed defiance. When the evidence had been presented, Crouch pronounced the maximum sentence, life imprisonment in Azkaban, without a flicker of emotion in his voice. This moment marked the effective end of Crouch's political ascendancy. Though he had demonstrated an unflinching commitment to justice even when it struck his own family, the public did not respond with admiration, but with a complex mixture of pity and distrust. How, many wondered, could a man who failed so completely as a father be trusted to lead the nation? More troublingly, others questioned how the son of such a prominent anti-Voldemort figure could have been drawn to the Death Eaters. Did it suggest a fundamental hypocrisy in the Crouch household? In the aftermath of his son's imprisonment, Crouch's wife fell ill, consumed, it was said, by grief over her son's fate. Crouch himself was passed over for the position of Minister of Magic, with Cornelius Fudge appointed instead. Rather than maintaining his position as head of magical law enforcement, Crouch was reassigned to the Department of International Magical Cooperation, a move widely interpreted as a demotion, shifting him from the center of power to a more ceremonial role. Yet the true nadir of Crouch's life was still to come. In a twist that would remain secret for years, he eventually yielded to his dying wife's final wish that their son be smuggled out of Azkaban and allowed to die at home rather than in that terrible prison. Using Polyjuice Potion, the wife took her son's place in his cell, while the young man returned home disguised as his mother. When the fake prisoner died in Azkaban, the body was buried without close inspection, the deception complete. The elder Crouch, now in the painful position of having compromised his lifelong principles for the sake of his wife's dying wish, kept his son at home under the imperious curse to prevent him from returning to Voldemort. This extraordinary arrangement, the former head of magical law enforcement illegally imprisoning his Death Eater son using an unforgivable curse, represented the complete inversion of the ordered, lawful world Crouch had devoted his life to building. In his reduced role at the Department of International Magical Cooperation, Crouch maintained his characteristic attention to detail and procedural correctness. He became known for his facility with languages, reportedly speaking over 200, an impressive but isolating talent that further marked him as different from his colleagues. His work largely focused on standardizing cauldron thickness regulations and organizing minor international magical events, a far cry from his previous responsibilities. The revival of the Triwizard tournament in 1994 represented Crouch's most significant project in years, and a potential opportunity to rebuild some of his diminished standing. As one of the key organizers, alongside Ludo Bagman from the Department of Magical Games and Sports, Crouch approached the task with his usual methodical thoroughness. The safety measures, magical contracts, and international coordination required for the tournament played to his administrative strengths. However, this potential professional rehabilitation was undermined by events at home. His son, gradually fighting off the effects of the imperious curse, escaped with the help of Voldemort's servant Peter Pettigrew. Crouch found himself in an impossible situation, unable to report his son's escape without revealing his own criminal actions and removing him from Azkaban, yet aware of the danger the young man posed, particularly with Voldemort seeking to return to power. Crouch's attendance at the Triwizard tournament became increasingly erratic as he struggled to maintain the appearance of normality while searching for his escaped son. His personal assistant, Percy Weasley, covered for these absences, attributing them to illness, a plausible explanation for a man who had visibly aged beyond his years, his once immaculate appearance now haggard, his precisely trimmed mustache ragged. The final tragedy occurred when Crouch, having briefly broken free from his son's control, the tables having turned, with the younger Crouch now using the imperious curse on his father, made his way to Hogwarts in a desperate attempt to warn Dumbledore about Voldemort's plans. Before he could deliver this warning, he was murdered by his own son, a grim culmination of the family tragedy that had unfolded over so many years. Barty Crouch Sr. His body was transfigured into a bone and buried in the grounds of Hogwarts, his disappearance initially attributed to madness or desertion. Only later would the full truth emerge, revealing the extent of his fall from power and the personal catastrophe that had consumed the final years of his life. Looking back on Crouch's administrative career, we find a man defined by contradictions. His organizational brilliance and commitment to magical law made him one of the most effective departmental heads in ministry history. The systems he implemented continued to function long after his departure, and many of his international magical cooperation agreements remained in force for decades. Yet his rigid inflexibility, both professionally and personally, ultimately contributed to his downfall. Perhaps the most lasting lesson from Crouch's career lies in the dangers of moral compromise, even when undertaken for seemingly justified ends. His authorization of unforgivable curses during the war created a precedent that haunted him, not only in its philosophical implications, but in its terrible symmetry with his son's crimes and his own eventual use of the imperious curse. The man who had built his reputation on upholding wizarding law ultimately became a lawbreaker himself, trapped in a web of his own making. As the fire burns low and our thoughts drift towards sleep, we might reflect on Barty Crouch's legacy as a caution about the balance between professional achievement and personal connection. His single-minded focus on his ministry career, his relentless pursuit of order and control, came at the expense of the human relationships, particularly with his son, that might have anchored him when crisis struck? What values might we prioritize in our own lives to avoid such isolation? How might we balance ambition with the connections that give meaning to success? Chapter 8. The Mechanics of the Trace. As night deepens around us, and the boundary between the waking world and dreams grows thin, let us examine one of the most subtle yet significant forms of magic in the wizarding world. A magic that touches every young witch and wizard, yet remains largely invisible until broken. Tonight we explore the mechanics of the trace, that elusive enchantment that monitors underage magic and forms a cornerstone of wizarding society's structure. The trace is an ancient magical monitoring charm placed upon children in the wizarding world when they first exhibit magical abilities, or, at the latest, when they receive their wands at age 11. This enchantment remains active until their 17th birthday, the age of magical majority, and serves the critical function of detecting when underage witches and wizards perform magic outside of educational settings. But beyond this basic understanding lies a complex magical system with fascinating implications for privacy, security, and the development of young magical people. Imagine, if you will, a delicate silver thread of magic, invisible to the eye, yet present all the same, extending from a young wizard's magical core to a special recording quill in the improper use of magic office at the ministry. This metaphorical thread vibrates whenever the underage wizard casts a spell, sending an immediate notification to ministry officials, while not a literal description of the enchantment. This imagery helps convey the essential connection the trace creates between young magical practitioners and the authorities responsible for enforcing the International Statute of Secrecy. The origins of the trace can be traced to the late 17th century, shortly after the implementation of the International Statute of Secrecy in 1692. As wizarding communities withdrew from open interaction with muggles, concerns arose about young witches and wizards who had not yet learned to control their abilities or understand the importance of magical discretion. Early versions of the monitoring charm were crude by modern standards, often triggering false alarms or failing to detect significant magical outbursts. The development of a more refined trace enchantment is generally attributed to Josephina Flitterbloom, a talented charm specialist who served in the newly formed Ministry of Magic in the early 18th century. Flitterbloom recognized that previous monitoring methods were too imprecise, focusing on detecting magic in a location rather than magic performed by a specific individual. Her innovation was to create an enchantment that would bond directly to a young witch or wizard's magical signature, their unique magical fingerprint, allowing for much more accurate monitoring. The application of the trace occurs through a process that remains one of the ministry's closely guarded procedures. While parents are informed that their children will be subject to magical monitoring, the actual implementation happens without ceremony or notification. Some magical scholars believe the trace activates automatically when a child's name appears in the Book of Admittance at Hogwarts, while others suggest it is applied during the wand selection process, with wand makers like Ollivander quietly incorporating the enchantment as part of their service to the ministry. What makes the trace particularly ingenious is its selective sensitivity. The enchantment is calibrated to distinguish between magic performed by the underage wizard and magic happening around them. This calibration is necessary to prevent false alarms in magical households where parents routinely use magic for everyday tasks. However, this same feature creates the well-known discrepancy in how the trace affects children from magical versus non-magical families. For a young witch like Hermione Granger, growing up in a muggle household where no other magic occurs, any spell she cast would be immediately detectable against the non-magical background. By contrast, a wizard like Ron Weasley, raised in the thoroughly magical environment of the Burrow, benefited from the trace's inability to distinguish between his magic and that of his parents or older siblings. This inconsistency in enforcement has been a source of ongoing debate within the wizarding community, with some arguing it unfairly disadvantages Muggle-born students who have fewer opportunities to practice during school holidays. The actual mechanics of how the trace detects magic involves several layers of sophisticated spell work. At its foundation is a variant of the Protean charm, the same principle that allows objects like the Dark Mark or Hermione's DA coins to communicate across distances. This connects the underage witch or wizard to the monitoring instruments at the Ministry. Layered upon this foundation are elements of Revelio spells that identify the specific nature of magic being performed, location charms that pinpoint the geographical coordinates of the magical activity. When underage magic is detected, an automated system at the Ministry of Magic triggers a series of responses. For first offenses, a standard warning letter is generated and dispatched by owl post, arriving with remarkable speed, sometimes within minutes of the infraction. The letter typically reminds the young witch or wizard of Section 13 of the International Confederation of Warlocks Statute of Secrecy and warns of more severe consequences for subsequent violations. Repeat offenses initiate a more serious response, potentially including a hearing before the improper use of magic office, or even the full Wizengamot in extreme cases. Harry Potter's experience in the summer before his 5th year at Hogwarts, when he cast a Patronus charm in the presence of his Muggle cousin Dudley, illustrates how this escalation can occur. Though Harry was ultimately exonerated due to the legitimate defense exception, his case demonstrates the seriousness with which the Ministry treats repeated violations of underage magic restrictions. The day-to-day operation of the trace monitoring system falls to a specialized team within the improper use of magic office. Picture a circular room, deep within the Ministry of Magic, its walls lined with thousands of delicate silver instruments, resembling weather vanes. Each instrument corresponds to an underage witch or wizard currently under the trace. When magic is detected, the corresponding instrument spins and emits a soft chime, alerting the monitoring wizard on duty. In cases where the magic detected is minor, perhaps a simple Lumos spell cast in the privacy of a bedroom, the monitoring wizard might exercise discretion and simply log the incident without issuing a formal warning. More serious infractions, particularly those risking Muggle exposure, trigger immediate action. This human element in the system allows for some nuance in enforcement, though Ministry policy officially calls for consistent application of the rules. The trace contains several important limitations that shape how it functions in practice. Perhaps most significantly, it detects magic performed in proximity to an underage witch or wizard, but cannot definitively identify who cast the spell. This limitation became critically important in the case of Dobby's hover charm performed at the Dursleys' home in Harry Potter's 2nd year. The Ministry assumed Harry had cast the spell, as he was the only known magical person at that location, unaware that a house elf had actually performed the magic. This limitation extends to situations involving wizard-dense areas like Diagon Alley or Hogsmeade. In such locations, the background magical noise makes it virtually impossible for the trace to accurately attribute specific spells to underage individuals. This is one reason why places like the Leaky Cauldron or the Three Broomsticks don't constantly trigger warnings when underage witches and wizards visit. The ambient magic overwhelms the monitoring system's ability to isolate individual magical signatures. Another significant limitation involves magical transportation. While the trace can detect when an underage witch or wizard travels by magical means like apparition, it cannot prevent such travel from occurring. This creates a curious loophole whereby a young wizard determined to break the restriction could theoretically apparate once and receive only a single warning, despite the considerable danger involved in attempting apparition without proper training. To address this vulnerability, additional protective enchantments are placed around locations like Hogwarts to physically prevent unauthorized apparition rather than merely detecting it. The trace also interacts with magical objects in complex ways. When an underage wizard uses an enchanted object that performs magic of its own accord, like a self-shuffling playing card deck or a remembrall, the trace typically does not register this as a violation. The magic belongs to the object rather than being performed by the underage witch or wizard. However, if the young person casts a spell on such an object to modify or activate it, that would trigger the trace. This distinction created a thriving market for pre-enchanted objects marketed to underage witches and wizards. as trace-safe entertainment during school holidays. Items like exploding snap cards, wizard chess sets, and magical joke products from establishments like Zonko's and later Weasley's Wizard Wheezes allowed young people to experience magical entertainment without risking ministry warnings. The ethical implications of the trace have been debated throughout its existence. On one hand, it serves important safety and security functions. Underage witches and wizards lack the training and judgment to consistently use magic responsibly, particularly around muggles. The trace provides a necessary safeguard during the developmental years, when magical ability often outpaces wisdom. On the other hand, critics have raised legitimate concerns about privacy and equality. The enchantment represents a significant intrusion into young people's lives, monitoring their activities in a way that adults are not subject to. The previously mentioned disparity between how the trace affects magical versus muggle-raised children creates an uneven playing field that many consider unfair. Some of the more progressive elements in wizarding society have advocated for reforms to the trace system. Proposals have included modifying the enchantment to function similarly in all environments, creating supervised practice sessions for muggle-born students during holidays, or implementing a graduated system that allows increasing degrees of magical freedom as students demonstrate responsibility and skill throughout their education. The removal of the trace at 17 is a significant moment in every young witch and wizard's life, a magical coming of age that coincides with their legal majority. The enchantment dissolves automatically at the stroke of midnight on their 17th birthday, without ceremony or notification. Many wizarding families, however, mark this milestone with celebration. In traditional pure-blood households, the removal of the trace might be commemorated with the gifting of a family watch or other heirloom, symbolizing the transition to adult responsibility. The exact process by which the trace dissolves remains somewhat mysterious. Magical theorists suggest that the enchantment includes a temporal component keyed to the witch or wizard's precise birth time. As this predetermined moment arrives, the connection between the individual's magical signature and the ministry's monitoring instruments simply fades away, like a knot untying itself after being set to release at a specific time. From a broader perspective, the trace reflects the wizarding world's approach to regulation and control, a balance between individual freedom and collective security. Unlike Muggle societies that often rely on physical surveillance or technical monitoring, the wizarding community uses enchantment itself to enforce its rules. This approach is both more elegant and more limited than Muggle methods, creating a system of regulation with its own unique characteristics and loopholes. During periods of political upheaval, the trace system has occasionally been misused. During both wizarding wars, there were reported instances of Death Eaters gaining access to trace information to locate and target Muggle-born students. These security breaches led to significant reforms in how trace data is protected within the Ministry, with modern systems incorporating multiple layers of magical security to prevent unauthorized access. When Voldemort's supporters briefly controlled the Ministry in 1997 to 1998, the trace became an even more sinister tool. The enchantment helped the corrupt regime track down underage witches and wizards who should have been attending Hogwarts, particularly Muggle-borns who were trying to avoid the Muggle-born Registration Commission. This dark chapter in the Trace's history led to post-war reforms designed to prevent similar abuses in the future. For all its complexities and controversies, the Trace remains an integral part of how the wizarding world transitions young people from children to adults. It represents a magical society's unique solution to the universal challenge of guiding developing minds while they learn to harness potentially dangerous abilities. In its subtle persistence and eventual dissolution, the trace mirrors the broader journey of magical education, a gradual process of gaining knowledge and freedom in careful measure. As your thoughts drift towards sleep, perhaps consider your own relationship with rules and monitoring. Would you find the trace's oversight comforting or constraining? Would you be tempted to test its boundaries, as generations of young witches and wizards have done? And what might it feel like to awaken on your 17th birthday, knowing that an invisible tether had finally dissolved, leaving you truly magically independent for the first time. Chapter 9. The North Tower. Moonlight streams through ancient window panes, casting long shadows across the castle grounds as we turn our attention to one of Hogwarts' most distinctive architectural features. Standing like a silent sentinel against the Scottish sky, the North Tower rises from the castle's northern periphery, an isolated spire of stone and mystery that has witnessed centuries of magical history unfold beneath its watchful presence. Unlike the more trafficked areas of Hogwarts, the busy corridors near the Great Hall or the well-worn paths to common rooms, the North Tower exists in a kind of splendid isolation. Its remote location at the northern edge of the castle complex means that students typically visit it only for specific purposes rather than passing through on their daily rounds. This geographical separation has contributed to the tower's somewhat mystical reputation among the student body, who often associate it exclusively with the divination classes held in its upper chamber. But the North Tower's history stretches far beyond its current function as Professor Trelawney's domain. Construction of the tower dates back to the early medieval period of Hogwarts' development, roughly a century after the founding. Historical records suggest it was commissioned during the tenure of Hogwarts' third headmaster, Hankerton Humble, who believed the school required a dedicated astronomical observation point separate from what would later become the astronomy tower. Picture the North Tower as it might have appeared in those early days, a fresh spire of pale stone rising from the northern battlements, its windows larger and more numerous than they would later become. The original purpose of the tower was indeed astronomical, but with a specific focus on tracking the movements of magical celestial bodies, phenomena like the orbits of planets with significant magical properties and the paths of comets believed to influence certain branches of spellwork. The tower's design reflects this original purpose. Unlike the open-topped astronomy tower, which allows for direct observation of the night sky, the North Tower features a unique octagonal chamber at its summit, with large windows on each of the 8 walls. These windows were carefully positioned to frame specific constellations and planetary alignments at different times of the year. The stone surrounding these windows was inscribed with astronomical calculations and runic annotations, many of which remain visible today beneath centuries of renovations and redecorations. Access to the North Tower has always been somewhat challenging, requiring navigation of one of Hogwarts' more confusing series of corridors and staircases. The main approach involves a narrow spiral staircase that winds tightly upward through the tower's core, opening onto a small landing at the 7th floor. From this landing, another, even narrower staircase continues to the topmost chamber. The physical exertion required to reach the tower's summit, particularly before the addition of various magical shortcuts in later centuries, meant that only those with specific business would make the journey. Over the centuries, the North Tower has served various functions within Hogwarts' educational program. Its first repurposing came in the 15th century when Headmistress Phillida Spore, a celebrated herbologist, converted the lower levels into specialized growing chambers for rare magical plants that required precise astronomical exposure. The tower's unique position and magical properties made it ideal for cultivating specimens that needed exactly calibrated amounts of moonlight or starlight. Imagine the tower during this period, its winding staircase lined with shelves of strange and beautiful plants, some glowing with their own inner light, others shifting and moving, as if dancing to the movements of distant stars. The main chamber at the top remained dedicated to astronomical observation, but the surrounding rooms became a kind of vertical magical garden, with different species organized according to their celestial requirements. This botanical arrangement persisted for nearly a century, until concerns about some of the more aggressive climbing plants, potentially compromising the tower's structural integrity, led to their relocation to early versions of what would become the Hogwarts greenhouses. However, the magical residue of this period remains detectable to those with sensitivity to such things. A faint scent of unusual flowers sometimes manifests in the stairwell, particularly on clear nights when the moon is full. The 16th century saw the North Tower, briefly repurposed, as accommodation for visiting magical dignitaries. During this period, the tower's middle levels were converted into a series of small but luxurious guest chambers, while the top room served as a private meeting space for diplomatic discussions. The tower's isolation from the main castle made it an ideal location for conversations requiring discretion, and several significant magical treaties of the era were negotiated in the octagonal chamber at its summit. One can still observe evidence of this diplomatic history in certain architectural details, ornate carvings around door frames depicting intertwined magical creatures from different nations, and specially enchanted windows that could display illusory views of the visitor's homeland rather than the Scottish landscape. These features remain, though subsequent renovations have obscured many of them. The tower's transition to its current role as the home of divination classes occurred in the early 18th century, coinciding with the subject's elevation to a more prominent position in the Hogwarts curriculum. This shift was championed by headmistress Dilys Derwent, who believed strongly in the value of divinatory arts, despite their somewhat contentious status among more empirically minded magical scholars. The octagonal chamber at the tower's top proved ideally suited for divination practices. Its 8-sided configuration aligned with the 8 sabbats of the magical year, creating naturally beneficial conditions for certain types of prognostication. The height of the tower also placed it literally between earth and sky, a position considered advantageous for various divinatory practices that seek to bridge the mundane and the ethereal. The tower's remote location offered another advantage for divination classes: relative quiet. Free from the distractions of the castle's busier areas, students could achieve the focused mental state necessary for successful scrying, tea leaf reading, or dream interpretation. The long climb up the spiral staircase also served as a kind of preparation, a physical journey that mirrored the mental transition from everyday concerns to the more abstract realm of divinatory practice. Over the centuries, successive divination professors have left their mark on the tower's appearance and atmosphere. Some favored a minimalist approach, stripping the octagonal chamber to its essential elements to eliminate distractions. Others, like Professor Trelawney, preferred a more elaborate environment filled with tools of their craft and atmospheric elements intended to facilitate the opening of the inner eye. The North Tower's physical structure contains several architectural curiosities worth noting. The spiral staircase that forms its core is constructed of a particularly dense variety of Scottish granite with unusual magical properties. This stone naturally resists enchantment, making it difficult to modify with spells, a feature that has protected the tower from various magical accidents over the centuries, but has also complicated renovation efforts. The windows of the octagonal chamber feature glass of varying ages and origins. The oldest panes date back to the tower's original construction and have developed a slight purple tint due to exposure to magical energies over centuries. Other sections were replaced following various incidents, including a particularly memorable occasion in 1793 when a student's mispronounced atmospheric charm created a localized hurricane within the classroom, shattering 3 of the 8 windows. Beneath the divination classroom, the tower contains several smaller rooms currently used for storage of divination supplies and old records. These areas are rarely visited by students but contain fascinating historical artifacts, outdated divination tools, records of notable predictions both fulfilled and unfulfilled, and personal journals of previous professors. Among these treasures is reputedly the original crystal ball used by Cassandra Trelawney, Sybil's famous great-great-grandmother, though few have been permitted to verify its authenticity. The tower's relationship with the castle's defensive capabilities is also noteworthy. During medieval times, the North Tower served as an important watchtower, offering views across the grounds toward the Forbidden Forest and the mountains beyond. Arrow slits in the lower levels, now mostly sealed or converted into narrow windows, testify to this defensive role. In times of danger, the tower could be magically sealed off from the rest of the castle, with supplies sufficient to maintain a small group of defenders for several weeks. This defensive aspect was activated on at least 3 documented occasions prior to the modern era, during the Dublin Rebellion of 1612, the werewolf incursions of 1637, and most famously during Grindelwald's brief assault on Hogwarts in 1945. During this last event, a small group of 7th-year students took refuge in the tower when separated from the main body of defenders, successfully holding off a contingent of Grindelwald's followers until Professor Dumbledore arrived to turn the tide of the battle. The tower's acoustic properties deserve special mention, due to its cylindrical structure and the particular arrangement of its spiral staircase. Sound travels in unusual ways within the North Tower. Whispers from the bottom of the stairwell can sometimes be heard clearly at the top, while louder noises may vanish entirely. This acoustic peculiarity has given rise to the tower's nickname among some students as the Whispering Tower, and has fueled rumors that the stone itself remembers and occasionally replays conversations from centuries past. During particularly fierce Scottish storms, the wind circling the tower creates an eerie moaning sound that can be heard throughout the northern sections of the castle. This natural phenomenon has contributed to the tower's somewhat mystical reputation, with various generations of students attributing the sounds to everything from restless spirits to the castle itself expressing emotion. The reality is more prosaic, simply the result of wind patterns interacting with the tower's architectural features, but the effect remains undeniably atmospheric. The relationship between the North Tower and Hogwarts' resident ghosts presents another interesting dimension. While ghosts can be found throughout the castle, they seem to avoid the North Tower with notable consistency. Nearly headless Nick, when asked about this curiosity by a curious Gryffindor, reportedly became uncharacteristically evasive, suggesting only that certain places prefer the living. Whether this spectral avoidance relates to the tower's astronomical origins, its divinatory present, or some other unknown quality, remains a matter of speculation among students and staff alike. For generations of Hogwarts students, the North Tower represents different things. For those studying divination, it becomes a familiar if somewhat quirky second home, its peculiar atmosphere and isolated location eventually developing a certain comfort through association with their studies. For others who visit only occasionally, or perhaps not at all, the tower retains an air of mystery, a place apart from the everyday rhythms of school life. During the Battle of Hogwarts in 1998, the North Tower suffered significant damage when giants allied with Voldemort's forces targeted it specifically, perhaps recognizing its strategic value. The upper sections were partially destroyed, with the octagonal chamber suffering extensive damage. In the reconstruction that followed Voldemort's defeat, careful attention was paid to restoring the tower's unique architectural features while reinforcing its structure against potential future attacks. Today, the North Tower stands as it has for centuries, somewhat apart from the main flow of castle life, yet integral to Hogwarts' identity and educational mission. Its stone walls have absorbed countless predictions, both mundane and momentous. Its winding staircase has felt the footsteps of students who would go on to shape wizarding history. Its windows have framed the same Scottish sky through generations of magical education. As your thoughts begin to drift toward dreams, consider the persistence of places that stand somewhat apart from our daily paths. Like the North Tower, they often become repositories for both history and mystery, spaces where time seems to flow differently, and where unexpected insights might await those willing to make the journey. What tower stands in your own personal landscape, inviting yet slightly separate, holding stories and perhaps wisdom that mainstream paths might not reveal? Chapter 10. The magic of wizard crackers. The gentle crackle of the fire accompanies us as we turn our thoughts to one of the wizarding world's most beloved festive traditions, a magical creation that brings delight and surprise to celebration tables throughout the magical community. Tonight we unravel the colorful paper and intricate enchantments of wizard crackers, those extraordinary party favors that bear only a passing resemblance to their modest Muggle counterparts. For those raised in non-magical households, the wizard cracker represents one of those delightful discoveries that illustrates the whimsical differences between Muggle and magical life. Where Muggle Christmas crackers offer a small paper hat, a modest toy, and perhaps a printed joke, wizard crackers explode with theatrical grandeur, releasing presents of surprising value and magical phenomena that transform the very air around them. The origins of wizard crackers can be traced to the mid-19th century, a period when the wizarding world was experiencing increased cultural exchange with Muggle society, despite the international statute of secrecy. In 1847, a London confectioner named Tom Smith invented the Muggle Christmas cracker, inspired by the crackling sound of logs burning in a fireplace. This invention quickly became popular throughout Britain as a festive novelty. It was Caractacus Philpenny, a wizard with a particular interest in Muggle inventions, who first saw the potential for magical enhancement. Philpenny, who maintained a small workshop in Canterbury, was known for taking Muggle creations and infusing them with magical properties, a practice that occasionally ran afoul of the misuse of Muggle artifacts regulations, but was generally tolerated for its harmless and entertaining results. Imagine Philpenny in his cluttered workshop, surrounded by half-completed enchantments and curious magical devices. A tall, thin wizard with spectacles perpetually sliding down his nose, he might have first encountered Christmas crackers during one of his regular excursions into Muggle London, where he sought inspiration for his next magical adaptation. Captivated by the simple joy these paper tubes brought to Muggle celebrations, he immediately recognized their potential for magical enhancement. Philpenny's first wizard crackers, created for the 1852 Christmas season, were relatively simple by modern standards. They contained a modified sonorous charm that amplified the traditional crack into a more impressive bang, and a basic ejection spell that propelled the contents into the air rather than simply dropping them onto the table. The gifts inside remained modest, typically sweets enchanted with minor magical effects like color-changing wrappers or flavors that transformed while being eaten. These early wizard crackers found immediate popularity among magical families, particularly those with young children. Unlike some magical novelties that required significant skill to operate, crackers could be enjoyed by anyone capable of pulling apart a paper tube, making them accessible even to the youngest witches and wizards. By the 1860s, Philpenny's festive fancies, as he called his creation, were being sold throughout magical Britain. The evolution of wizard crackers from novelty to art form occurred largely through the efforts of Celestina Warbeck's grandmother, Cordelia Warbeck. Cordelia, a formidable witch with talents in both charms and transfiguration, saw the potential for crackers to deliver a more theatrical experience. In 1879, she established Warbeck's Wonderful Wizard Crackers, a company dedicated to pushing the boundaries of what these festive items could achieve. Under Cordelia's direction, wizard crackers became increasingly elaborate. She developed methods to incorporate multiple enchantments that would activate in sequence, creating a miniature magical performance with each pull. Her signature creation, the Celestial Celebration Cracker, released a constellation of tiny stars that hung in the air for several minutes, rearranging themselves to spell out personalized messages for the recipients before transforming into small gifts. The manufacturing process for wizard crackers involves a fascinating combination of mundane craftsmanship and complex spellwork. The outer shells are typically constructed from high-quality paper treated with flame-resistant potions, a necessary precaution given the magical energies contained within. These shells are decorated with moving illustrations, often depicting seasonal scenes that animate when touched. Snowmen that wave to passers-by, reindeer that prance along the cracker's length, or holly leaves that rustle as if stirred by a gentle breeze. The internal components include a modified caterwauling charm, carefully calibrated to produce a festive bang rather than an alarming shriek, along with an array of expansion charms that create space for gifts far larger than the cracker's exterior dimensions would suggest possible. The most sophisticated crackers incorporate elements of pocket dimension magic similar to that used in wizarding tents and trunks, allowing for truly impressive contents while maintaining a manageable external size. Perhaps the most challenging aspect of cracker production involves the enchantments that determine what gift each recipient receives. Premium wizard crackers include discernment charms that sense the preferences and personality of the person pulling the cracker, ensuring they receive something particularly suited to their tastes. This magic requires considerable finesse, too specific, and the range of possible gifts becomes too limited, but too general, and the personal touch is lost. By the early 20th century, wizard crackers had become an essential feature of magical Christmas celebrations at homes, schools, and institutions throughout the wizarding world. At Hogwarts, the Christmas feast always features particularly spectacular specimens, specially commissioned by the school, and considerably more elaborate than those typically found in shops. These Hogwarts crackers have been known to contain live animals, albeit small and friendly ones, musical instruments that play themselves, and hats of exceptional grandeur beyond the simple paper crowns found in Muggle versions. The experience of pulling a wizard cracker differs substantially from its Muggle equivalent. When two people pull a magical cracker, the resulting explosion often takes a distinctive form, not merely a bang, but a specific magical effect unique to that cracker's design. Some release clouds of glittering smoke in house colors. Others transform briefly into magical creatures that perform a quick aerial display before dissipating. The more expensive varieties might temporarily alter the room's atmosphere, filling the air with the scent of pine forests or creating the illusion of gently falling snow. The contents of wizard crackers vary widely depending on their quality and intended audience. Basic models available in shops like Gamble and Japes typically contain magical sweets, simple joke items, and perhaps small enchanted toys. Mid-range crackers, such as those produced by Weasley's Wizard Wheezes in later years, might include more sophisticated joke products, minor useful magical items like ever-bashing boomerangs or reusable hangmen, and higher-quality wizarding hats. The truly premium crackers, however, offer gifts of surprising value and utility. Historical accounts mention wizard crackers containing everything from self-updating books to jewelry, with protective enchantments, and even, in one notable case documented in 1921, a racing broom that emerged fully sized from a seemingly ordinary cracker at a Ministry of Magic Christmas gala. This last example caused something of a diplomatic incident when the broom, apparently confused by the crowded conditions, attempted to take flight with the assistant head of the Department of International Magical Cooperation still holding onto its handle. The tradition of wizard crackers extends beyond Christmas to other significant celebrations in the wizarding calendar. Special editions are produced for magical weddings, coming-of-age ceremonies, and the conclusion of important wizarding examinations. These event-specific crackers often incorporate thematically appropriate enchantments. Wedding crackers might release doves or shower the recipients with never-wilting flower petals, while examination crackers sometimes contain miniature animated recreations of famous magical discoveries relevant to the subject studied. The social dynamics of wizard crackers add another layer to their charm. Unlike many gifts that are chosen specifically for their recipient, the partially random nature of cracker contents introduces an element of surprise that levels social distinctions. At a wizarding Christmas table, a ministry official might find themselves wearing a ridiculous hat, while a young child might receive something of unexpected value or sophistication. This unpredictability contributes to the sense of wonder and occasion that wizard crackers bring to celebrations. Of course, as with all magical creations, wizard crackers have occasionally been subject to misuse or mishap. Erience is its busiest period during the Christmas season, responding to incidents ranging from minor issues, crackers that won't stop banging, to more serious situations, contents that expand beyond intended parameters, or enchantments that interact unpredictably with existing household magic. One particularly notorious incident occurred in 1962, when an experimental line of self-selecting crackers developed by Warbeck's wonderful wizard crackers gained an unexpected degree of sentience. These crackers, designed to actively seek out the person at a gathering who would most appreciate their contents, began making increasingly complex judgments about human compatibility. By the time the issue was identified, several crackers had attempted to arrange romantic pairings among party guests by forcibly drawing selected individuals together. The line was quickly discontinued, though several marriages reportedly resulted from these matchmaking crackers. The production of wizard crackers remains primarily a British magical tradition, though international variations have developed over time. French magical celebrations feature petards and chantés that release miniature fireworks displaying scenes from classical wizarding literature. German Zauberknaller typically contain practical household items enhanced with unusual magical properties. American wizarding communities have developed their own version called thunderclaps, which are notably louder than their British counterparts and often incorporate regional magical styles from different parts of the country. During the darker periods of wizarding history, wizard crackers have sometimes served as small but significant symbols of resistance and hope. During both wizarding wars, when celebrations were necessarily subdued and sometimes dangerous, specially enchanted crackers were distributed among those opposing Voldemort. These unassuming items contained coded messages, emergency portkeys, or protective charms, disguised as ordinary gifts. The exterior decorations of these crackers included subtle symbols recognizable only to members of the Order of the Phoenix or Dumbledore's army, allowing important resources to be distributed under the guise of simple festive traditions. For children raised in wizarding households, the first opportunity to pull a wizard cracker often represents a memorable milestone. Unlike many magical objects that require wands or specific incantations to activate, crackers respond to the simple physical action of pulling, making them accessible even to very young children who have not yet begun formal magical education. The delight of a first magical explosion, accompanied by a gift that might dance, fly, or transform, creates an early connection to the wonder of the magical world. At Hogwarts, the Christmas feast crackers have developed their own body of lore and superstition among students. Some believe that the color of the smoke released when a cracker is pulled predicts your success in the coming term's examinations. Others maintain that if you find a silver trinket in your cracker, you should keep it close during the next Quidditch match for luck. The Weasley twins reportedly conducted extensive research into whether crackers could be modified to target specific individuals at the table, though the results of these investigations were never formally documented. The artistry involved in premium wizard crackers extends beyond their enchantments to their physical appearance. The finest examples, particularly those created for significant wizarding events, often feature handcrafted exteriors with intricate magical illustrations. For the celebration marking the end of the Second Wizarding War, a special commemorative series was commissioned featuring portraits of those who had fought against Voldemort. These crackers were enchanted so that when pulled, the illustrated figures would briefly step off the paper to offer a toast or words of encouragement before the main enchantment activated. The sensory experience of wizard crackers engages more than just sight and sound. Many are enhanced with aromatic charms that release appropriate scents: cinnamon and cloves for Christmas crackers, fresh flowers for spring celebrations, or ocean breezes for summer parties. The more sophisticated varieties incorporate tactile elements as well. The paper might feel like silk, velvet, or even like cool water to the touch, transforming as the cracker is handled. As our exploration of wizard crackers draws to a close, we can appreciate how these seemingly simple novelties embody so much of what makes magical culture distinct. The playful enhancement of everyday objects, the celebration of surprise and wonder, and the bringing together of people through shared magical experiences. From Caractacus Philpenny's first experiments to the elaborate creations found on contemporary wizarding tables, wizard crackers have evolved while maintaining their essential purpose: to bring a burst of joy and magic to life's celebrations. As sleep begins to claim your consciousness, Perhaps you might wonder what you would find inside a wizard cracker, perfectly matched to your own desires. Would it contain something practical or whimsical, something to be treasured, or something to evoke immediate laughter? And in that moment of anticipation before the magical bang which is more precious, the certainty of receiving something wonderful, or the delicious uncertainty of not knowing exactly what magical surprise awaits. Chapter 11. The famous matches of the Quidditch World Cup. As starlight filters through our window, and the hour grows late, let us soar through the annals of sporting history to revisit the most spectacular, controversial, and memorable matches ever played on Quidditch's grandest stage. The Quidditch World Cup has provided countless moments of breathtaking skill, heart-stopping drama, and occasional controversy that have become legendary among wizarding sports enthusiasts. Tonight, we shall immerse ourselves in these remarkable contests that have shaped the development of the game and captured the imagination of the wizarding world. Perhaps no World Cup final looms larger in Quidditch lore than the legendary match of 1473, not merely for being the first officially recognized championship, but for establishing a standard of ferocity that led to the codification of all 700 Quidditch fouls. Imagine that ancient pitch in France, where Transylvania and Flanders engaged in a contest so physically intense that contemporary accounts describe it as more resembling a battlefield than a sporting contest. The match began conventionally enough, with Transylvanian chasers demonstrating their innovative hawkshead attacking formation to great effect. By the second hour, however, the tone had shifted dramatically after a Flanders beater, frustrated by Transylvania's mounting lead, allegedly attempted to transfigure an opposing player's broomstick into a venomous serpent mid-flight. This incident sparked a cascade of increasingly creative rule violations, culminating in what the official match record diplomatically terms comprehensive abandonment of sporting conduct by all 14 participants. By the time Transylvanian seeker Vlad Dracul finally captured the snitch reportedly after using a mild confundus charm on his opposite number, every player on the pitch had committed at least 13 distinct fouls. The subsequent investigation by the International Association of Quidditch produced the first comprehensive rulebook governing acceptable play, a document that ran to 37 volumes and required 3 separate, magically expanded trunks for transport. While many early World Cup matches have faded into historical obscurity, certain contests stand out for their extraordinary circumstances. The 1679 final between Transylvania and Turkey gained notoriety when, at a crucial moment with Turkey leading 640-610, play was interrupted by an agitated Hungarian horntail dragon that had escaped from a nearby reservation. Rather than abandoning the match, both teams' seekers reportedly agreed to a remarkable wager. Whoever caught the snitch would earn their team the victory, but only after they had jointly helped subdue the dragon. Turkish seeker Hasan Mostafa ultimately spotted the snitch hovering near the dragon's tail, and in a display of either remarkable courage or outright recklessness, executed a diving feint that both distracted the dragon and positioned him to capture the golden ball. The maneuver, later dubbed Mostafa's plunge, became so iconic that for nearly a century afterward, Quidditch players would use the phrase chasing dragons to describe particularly dangerous tactical gambles. The 1809 World Cup final between England and Nigeria introduced several revolutionary technical innovations to professional Quidditch. The Nigerian team, composed primarily of players from the renowned Patonga Proudsticks Club, unveiled a modified reverse pass that incorporated elements of a vertical dive, a technique that allowed their chasers to evade England's formidable defensive formations. England countered with the first documented use of the doppelbeater defense, in which both beaters strike a bludger simultaneously to generate extraordinary speed and power. The match extended for 7 hours and 4 minutes, with momentum shifting dramatically throughout. Nigeria built an early lead of 340-100 before England's chasers adjusted to the new passing technique. The English comeback culminated in a spectacular finish when seeker Albert Widdershins caught the snitch while hanging upside down from his broom. having been partially unseated by a bludger moment earlier. His one-handed capture secured England's victory with a final score of 400-390, ending what contemporary Quidditch correspondent Hortensia Harbottle described as the most technically accomplished display of aerial mastery yet witnessed on the World Cup stage. No discussion of famous World Cup matches would be complete without acknowledging the controversial marathon match of 1877, when Brazil and Mongolia competed for 5 days and 18 hours in the longest final in tournament history. The unprecedented duration resulted primarily from an unusual snitch, later discovered to have been accidentally infused with additional repelling charms by a well-meaning but inexperienced assistant to the equipment manager. This hyperactive snitch evaded both seekers with such effectiveness that officials were eventually forced to implement unprecedented rest periods, allowing players to sleep in shifts while their teammates continued. The visual spectacle of this extended contest transformed the Egyptian venue into a pilgrimage site for Quidditch enthusiasts worldwide. By the third day, the crowd had swelled to nearly 30,000, far beyond the stadium's intended capacity, necessitating rapid magical expansion of the stands. Food vendors established semi-permanent stalls, and an impromptu market emerged in the surrounding area as the match evolved from sporting event to cultural phenomenon. Mongolia eventually secured victory when their reserve seeker Kutulun Khan, brought in after the primary seeker collapsed from exhaustion, captured the troublesome snitch during the pre-dawn hours of the 6th day. The final score of 7,590-7,580 remains the highest combined score in World Cup history. More significantly, the match led to the establishment of standardized testing procedures for all equipment used in professional Quidditch, particularly the notoriously temperamental Golden Snitch. The 1902 World Cup final between Canada and France gained historical significance for entirely different reasons. Played during a period of unusually heavy magical atmospheric disturbance, attributed by some to experimental charm work being conducted in the vicinity, the match was repeatedly affected by unpredictable magical phenomena. Brooms occasionally reversed direction without player input. The quaffle briefly transformed into a fanged frisbee during a crucial scoring attempt. And most memorably, all 14 players simultaneously experienced a 30-second period of uncontrolled levitation, independent of their broomsticks. Rather than abandon the match, the players demonstrated remarkable adaptability, developing impromptu signals to warn teammates of approaching anomalies. The French chasers particularly excelled under these challenging conditions, employing their distinctive one-handed passing style to maintain possession during magical disruptions. After 3 hours of increasingly creative adaptation to the unstable magical environment, French seeker Apolline Moreau captured the snitch during one of the levitation incidents, having kicked off from the handle of her temporarily unresponsive broomstick to make the catch. The atmospheric final, as it came to be known, is celebrated less for the technical quality of play than for the remarkable sportsmanship and resourcefulness displayed by both teams. The International Confederation of Wizards subsequently established guidelines for monitoring magical atmospheric conditions before major sporting events, and the special silver whistle used by the referee to maintain control during the chaotic conditions remains on display at the Museum of Quidditch in London. The emotional resonance of certain World Cup matches transcends their sporting significance, reflecting broader historical contexts. The 1950 final between Spain and Italy, the first tournament held after the disruption of both Grindelwald's rise and the Second World War, carried particular symbolic weight. Many players had lost family members during these tumultuous years, and both teams included individuals who had actively fought against dark forces. The match itself was technically brilliant but somber in tone, with minimal showmanship and a focus on clean, precise play. When Italian seeker Giancarlo Fiorentino captured the snitch to secure a narrow victory, he dedicated the win to his brother, who had died opposing Grindelwald's forces. The post-match ceremony included a minute of silence, observed by all attendees, regardless of nationality, a moment that wizarding sports historian Brutus Scrimgeour later described as transcending competition to affirm the shared values that unite the wizarding world even in its most divided times. The 1970s witnessed a revolution in Quidditch tactics, epitomized by the 1974 final between Australia and Syria. The Australian team, captained by legendary strategist Margaret Mickelson, introduced the now common zone defense approach, with chasers assigned specific aerial territories rather than marking individual opponents. Syria countered with an ultra-aggressive style based on rapid acceleration and near-constant player movement, an approach made possible by their pioneering use of the newly developed Nimbus 1500 racing broom. The resulting contest featured the highest number of possession changes ever recorded in a World Cup final, with the quaffle changing hands on average every 4.2 seconds during the most intense stretches of play. The Syrian chasers established an early lead through their superior speed, but Australia's more structured approach gradually gained advantage as fatigue became a factor. With the score tied at 150, Australian seeker Charlie Weatherby executed a perfect Wronski feint that drew his Syrian counterpart into a high-speed dive before pulling up sharply to capture the actual snitch hovering in the opposite direction. This tactical masterclass is still studied at professional Quidditch academies worldwide, with Weatherby's feint in particular analyzed for its perfect combination of timing, misdirection, and technical execution. The match also marked a turning point in professional broom selection, as teams began tailoring their equipment choices to specific tactical approaches, rather than simply selecting the fastest available models. Few World Cup matches have generated as much controversy as the 1966 final between Armenia and Australia, a contest whose official outcome remains disputed in some quarters. The match progressed normally until the Armenian seeker, Yusef Darbinian, appeared to capture the snitch after 3 days of play. Australia immediately lodged a protest, claiming the snitch had been tampered with to favor the Armenian team. The subsequent investigation revealed unusual magical signatures on the snitch, though whether these resulted from deliberate tampering or inadvertent contamination remains unresolved. After 17 hours of closed-door deliberation, tournament officials upheld Armenia's victory, but the controversy prompted a complete overhaul of equipment security procedures for subsequent tournaments. Armenian fans celebrate the match as a legitimate triumph, while Australian supporters still refer to it as the stolen snitch final. Perhaps the most balanced assessment comes from neutral Quidditch analyst Georgina Wheelock, who noted, "Whatever the truth regarding the snitch, both teams demonstrated exceptional skill throughout the match. The controversy should not entirely overshadow what was, in purely sporting terms, a contest of remarkable quality between two exceptionally matched sides." The introduction of new nationalities to the highest level of competition has repeatedly revitalized World Cup play. The 1982 tournament saw Madagascar reach the final for the first time, facing perennial powerhouse United States in a match that showcased dramatically different approaches to the game. Madagascar's team, drawn primarily from the island's isolated wizarding communities, played with a fluid, improvisational style rarely seen in established Quidditch nations, with positions shifting fluidly throughout the match depending on game circumstances. This tactical flexibility initially confused the more specialized American players, allowing Madagascar to build a substantial early lead. Captain Robert Esposito called a strategic timeout 2 hours into the match, after which his team adopted a more aggressive bludger-focused approach, specifically targeting Madagascar's most versatile player, beater chaser Faneva Rakoto-Racing. This adjustment gradually eroded Madagascar's advantage, setting the stage for a dramatic conclusion when both seekers spotted the snitch simultaneously, leading to a neck-and-neck chase that American seeker Debbie Muntz won by inches, securing a 410-380 victory. Despite the defeat, Madagascar's innovative approach influenced a generation of Quidditch tacticians. Within 5 years, most elite teams had incorporated elements of positional fluidity into their strategies, and training programs increasingly emphasized versatility alongside specialized skills, a development that Madagascar's coach Ratsiraka described as a victory for our philosophy, if not for our team in that particular final. The 1994 World Cup final between Ireland and Bulgaria represents perhaps the most thoroughly documented match in tournament history, owing both to its extraordinary quality and its unfortunate aftermath. The sporting contest itself exemplified Quidditch at its highest level. Ireland's chasers, Troy, Mullet, and Moran, demonstrated perfect coordination in their hawk's head attacking formation, while Bulgaria relied heavily on the transcendent talent of seeker Viktor Krum. What made this match particularly remarkable was its strategic complexity. Ireland's game plan specifically accounted for Krum's superior seeking skills, focusing on building an insurmountable lead through chaser play rather than racing for the snitch. Bulgaria, conversely, sought to keep the score close enough for Krum's eventual capture of the snitch to secure victory. This clash of approaches created a fascinating tactical battle beyond the physical contest, with each team's strengths directly challenging the other's strategy. The match culminated in one of the most discussed moments in World Cup history: Krum's decision to catch the snitch when Bulgaria trailed by more than 150 points, ending the game on his terms, despite ensuring his team's defeat. This choice has been endlessly analyzed by Quidditch strategists, with some criticizing it as admitting defeat, and others praising it as a pragmatic recognition of Ireland's overwhelming chaser superiority. Krum himself, characteristically taciturn, simply stated, "They were better." To drag it out would change nothing. The final score of 170-160 in favor of Ireland reflected both the Irish chasers' dominance and Krum's individual brilliance. Unfortunately, this exceptional sporting display was overshadowed by the Death Eater attack that followed in the campgrounds, marking one of the first public signs of Voldemort's impending return to power. The post-war period has witnessed its own share of memorable World Cup finals. The 2002 match between Japan and Lithuania introduced several technological innovations to the tournament, including the first use of omnioculars for official match review and experimental charms that allowed spectators to temporarily experience play from a player's perspective through designated viewing areas in the stadium. The match itself featured Japan's technically precise style against Lithuania's more physically imposing approach. Lithuanian beaters Bielobzeskis and Ramanauskaitis controlled the middle aerial zones with remarkable effectiveness, while Japan's chasers executed their signature spiral passing sequences in the periphery. After 4 hours of tactical adjustment and counter-adjustment, Japanese seeker Takahashi executed what many consider the perfect snitch capture, approaching from directly beneath during a temporary lull in bludger activity, with such smooth acceleration that neither opposing seeker nor spectators realized what was happening until she had already secured the golden ball in her grasp. Brazilian commentator Jogo Corujão described the capture as so perfectly timed and executed that it appeared less like competition and more like a demonstration of how seeking should be taught. The victory represented Japan's first World Cup title and cemented their reputation as technical innovators in the sport. As our journey through famous World Cup matches draws to a close, we return to the essence of what makes these contests so captivating: the unpredictable alchemy of individual brilliance, team coordination, and the sheer magical spectacle of the world's finest Quidditch players competing at the absolute pinnacle of their sport. From Vlad Dracul's controversial victory in the first tournament to the technical perfection of modern finals, the World Cup has consistently showcased not merely the evolution of Quidditch itself, but the enduring spirit of magical competition. These legendary matches remind us that sporting history is made not only through victory and defeat, but through moments of extraordinary skill, sportsmanship, innovation, and occasionally, controversy. As you drift towards sleep, perhaps you might imagine yourself in the stands at some future World Cup final, watching as new chapters in this remarkable sporting tradition unfold in the skies above. Which nation would you support, and what style of play would capture your imagination as the world's finest seekers race after that elusive golden glimmer among the clouds? Chapter 12. The Treachery of Barty Crouch, Jr. As our fire dims to glowing embers and shadows deepen around us, we turn to a tale of darkness, deception, and devastating loyalty to the wrong cause. Tonight we explore the tragic story of Bartemius Crouch Jr., a young man born to privilege and potential, whose path twisted toward becoming one of Lord Voldemort's most devoted and dangerous servants. His elaborate scheme to infiltrate Hogwarts and deliver Harry Potter to his master stands as one of the most complex acts of treachery in modern wizarding history. Barty Crouch Jr. was born in the early 1960s to Bartemius Crouch Sr., a rising star in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, and his wife, a gentle witch whose name has largely been lost to history, overshadowed by the notorious actions of her husband and son. The young Crouch grew up in a household defined by his father's rigid dedication to magical law and order, his strict adherence to rules, and his consuming ambition for the Minister of Magic position. Imagine the Crouch household during Barty's childhood, a place of exacting standards and limited warmth. The elder Crouch, perpetually preoccupied with his ministry career, was frequently absent. When present, he likely viewed his son primarily as a reflection of his own reputation, rather than as an individual with needs and desires of his own. In such an environment, the foundations for resentment and rebellion were laid early, though they would remain hidden beneath a veneer of compliance for many years. Young Barty proved to be a wizard of considerable talent and intelligence. Upon arriving at Hogwarts, sorted into an unrecorded house, though some evidence suggests Ravenclaw, he quickly distinguished himself academically. Former professors would later recall his exceptional aptitude for complex magic, particularly in transfiguration and defense against the dark arts, with outstanding marks. A record that reflected not only natural ability, but a disciplined approach to study that mirrored his father's methodical personality. What makes Barty Crouch Jr.'s story particularly tragic is that, by all accounts, he began his life as a young man of genuine promise. Photographs from his school years show a handsome teenager with straw-colored hair and a sprinkling of freckles across his nose, his expression eager and intelligent. His teachers, when interviewed after his crimes came to light, expressed particular shock that a student who had seemed so bright and capable could have turned toward darkness so completely. The exact circumstances of Crouch Jr.'s radicalization remains somewhat mysterious. No definitive moment marks his transition from model student to Death Eater. Rather, the evidence suggests a gradual process of alienation and seduction that occurred during his late teens, coinciding with Voldemort's first rise to power. Like many who joined the Death Eaters during this period, he likely found in Voldemort's movement a sense of purpose and belonging that had been lacking in his emotionally austere upbringing. There is a painful irony in the fact that Barty Crouch Jr. joined the very movement his father had dedicated his professional life to destroying. Perhaps this was part of the appeal, a way to definitively separate himself from his father's shadow and assert his independence in the most dramatic possible fashion. Perhaps, too, he found in Voldemort a father figure who recognized and valued his abilities in ways his actual father never had. Whatever his motivations, by the time he was 20 years old, Barty Crouch Jr. had taken the dark mark and committed himself to Voldemort's cause. The extent of his activities during this first period as a Death Eater is not well documented. He operated with sufficient secrecy that his father, despite leading the Ministry's anti-Death Eater efforts, remained entirely unaware of his son's allegiances. The event that brought Barty Crouch Jr.'s true loyalty to light came shortly after Voldemort's first downfall. In the chaotic aftermath of the Dark Lord's disappearance, many Death Eaters sought to maintain the movement's momentum through continued violence. Among the most notorious incidents during this period was the torture of Frank and Alice Longbottom. Two highly respected Aurors were subjected to the Cruciatus Curse until they lost their sanity. Crouch Jr. participated in this atrocity alongside the Lestranges, Bellatrix, Rodolphus, and Rabastan. The precise circumstances of his involvement are unclear. Some accounts suggest he was a full and willing participant, while others indicate he may have been present but less actively engaged in the torture itself. Regardless, his presence at such a horrific crime marked him indelibly as one of Voldemort's true followers, not merely a sympathizer or someone acting under coercion. The capture of the 4 Death Eaters responsible for the Longbottom's torture led to one of the most dramatic trials in wizarding legal history. Imagine the scene in that ministry courtroom, the assembled Wizengamot in their plum-colored robes, the enchanted chains on the defendants' chairs, and at the center of it all, the unprecedented spectacle of Bartemius Crouch Sr. presiding over the trial of his own son. Witnesses described the younger Crouch during this trial as alternating between terrified pleas for mercy and defiant declarations of loyalty to Voldemort. "The Dark Lord will rise again, Crouch," he reportedly screamed at his father. "Throw us into Azkaban. We will wait. He will rise again, and will come for us. He will reward us beyond any of his other supporters. We alone were faithful. We alone tried to find him." The elder Crouch, his face described as mask-like by those present, pronounced the maximum sentence without hesitation. Life imprisonment in Azkaban. This moment of harsh justice at the expense of his own flesh and blood earned Crouch Sr. both admiration and criticism from the wizarding public, but it effectively ended his political aspirations. Few could imagine entrusting the role of Minister of Magic to a man who had so completely failed to recognize the darkness in his own household. For the younger Crouch, Azkaban should have meant the end of his story, a lifetime surrounded by Dementors, gradually losing his mind and memories like most long-term prisoners of that terrible place. Yet his tale took an unexpected turn through the intervention of his mother, who was dying of a prolonged illness, and made a final, desperate request of her husband. During what was to be their last visit to their son in prison, the Crouches enacted an extraordinary deception. Using Polyjuice Potion, mother and son exchanged appearances. The dying woman, now appearing as her son, remained in the cell, while the young man, disguised as his mother, walked free with his father. The plan exploited the fact that Dementors, being blind, could not visually detect the switch, relying instead on sensing the prisoner's emotions. The woman who had sacrificed herself died shortly afterward in Azkaban, still bearing her son's appearance, and was buried in the prison graveyard. Meanwhile, Barty Crouch Jr., now believed dead by the wizarding world at large, was smuggled back to the family home and kept under the imperious curse by his father to ensure he could not rejoin Voldemort's remaining supporters. Imagine the young Crouch's existence during this period, physically free from Azkaban, but living under a different kind of imprisonment in his father's house. The imperious curse suppressed his own will, forcing him into docile compliance with his father's instructions. For years, he remained hidden from the world, his presence in the Crouch household known only to the family house elf, Winky, who was assigned to watch over him constantly. This unnatural arrangement persisted for nearly a decade, during which the elder Crouch maintained his ministry career in a diminished capacity, having been transferred from the Department of Magical Law Enforcement to the Department of International Magical Cooperation. As the years passed, however, Barty Jr. began to fight against the imperious curse with increasing success, experiencing moments of clarity amid the fog of magical control. The critical turning point came during the Quidditch World Cup of 1994. Winky convinced the elder Crouch to allow his son to attend the match, arguing that the young man had remained imprisoned for years and deserved a small taste of freedom. Seated in the top box under an invisibility cloak with Winky at his side, Barty Jr. found himself experiencing the most freedom he had known in years. And in that moment of relative liberty, his resistance to the imperious curse grew strong enough for him to take action. When the Death Eater riot erupted in the campgrounds after the match, Barty seized the opportunity amid the chaos. Breaking free of both the weakened imperious curse and Winky's supervision, he obtained a wand and cast the Dark Mark, Voldemort's symbol, into the sky. This act, intended to frighten the attacking Death Eaters, whom he viewed as having abandoned Voldemort after his fall, demonstrated his continued loyalty to the Dark Lord, even after years of imprisonment. Though recaptured by his father following this incident, Barty's brief rebellion marked the beginning of the end for his captivity. Not long afterward, news reached the Crouch household that would change everything. Lord Voldemort, greatly weakened but still alive in rudimentary form, had returned to Britain with the assistance of Peter Pettigrew. Sensing an opportunity to locate and serve his master, Barty intensified his struggle against his father's control. The final break came when Voldemort himself, having learned that Barty Crouch Jr. was alive through information provided by Bertha Jorkins, a ministry employee who had accidentally discovered the secret, arrived at the Crouch home with Wormtail. They overpowered the Elder Crouch and freed the son from the Imperious Curse. The roles were then dramatically reversed. Barty Jr. now placed his father under the Imperious Curse, controlling the man who had controlled him for so many years. It was at this point that Voldemort revealed his grand scheme to Barty, a plan requiring a faithful servant to infiltrate Hogwarts, manipulate the Triwizard tournament, and ultimately deliver Harry Potter to Voldemort for the ritual that would restore the Dark Lord to full power. Barty, eager to prove his loyalty after years of forced inaction, volunteered immediately for this dangerous and complex mission. The plan required extraordinary deception, using Polyjuice Potion, a cruel echo of the method used in his own escape from Azkaban. Barty would impersonate Alastor, Mad-Eye Moody, the famous Auror, who had been appointed as the new defense against the dark arts teacher at Hogwarts. This required first capturing the real Moody, which Barty accomplished the night before the term began, keeping the Auror imprisoned in his own magical trunk while regularly harvesting hair for the Polyjuice Potion. Imagine the level of preparation this deception required. Barty would need to convincingly imitate not just Moody's physical appearance, but his distinctive personality, speech patterns, and extensive knowledge of dark arts and Auror techniques. That he managed this impersonation successfully for an entire school year, even fooling Albus Dumbledore himself, speaks to Barty's intelligence, attention to detail, and considerable acting abilities. Throughout the school year, while maintaining his cover as Professor Moody, Barty methodically executed the steps of Voldemort's plan. He confounded the Goblet of Fire to accept Harry Potter's name under a fourth school, ensuring Harry would be bound by magical contract to compete in the tournament. He subtly assisted Harry through the tournament's tasks, eliminating other champions' advantages and providing indirect guidance to ensure Harry would reach the final task in a position to win. All the while, he converted the Triwizard Cup into a portkey that would transport Harry to the graveyard where Voldemort waited. The intricate nature of this plot required patience, precision, and constant vigilance against discovery. Ironic, given that constant vigilance was the real Moody's famous catchphrase, which Barty appropriated as part of his disguise. What makes Barty Crouch Jr. his deception particularly chilling is how effectively he integrated himself into Hogwarts life. Students generally found Professor Moody to be an engaging, if intimidating, teacher. His defense against the dark arts lessons were practical and informative. He even earned Harry's trust and gratitude by punishing Draco Malfoy, transforming him into a ferret for attempting to hex Harry when his back was turned. In perhaps the most disturbing demonstration of his commitment to his role, Barty performed class demonstrations of the 3 unforgivable curses, including the Cruciatus Curse, which he himself had used to torture the Longbottoms into insanity. Adding another layer of horror to this moment, Neville Longbottom was present in that classroom, watching the demonstration of the very curse that had destroyed his parents' minds. Throughout this period, Barty continued to keep his father under the Imperious Curse, forcing him to maintain his normal correspondence and duties at the Ministry via written communications. When the Elder Crouch occasionally managed to fight off the curse enough to attempt escape, Barty would reassert control, eventually killing his father when he made his way to Hogwarts and threatened to expose everything to Dumbledore. After murdering his father, Barty transfigured the body into a bone and buried it in the freshly turned earth of Hagrid's garden. A chillingly pragmatic disposal that went undiscovered until the plot's conclusion. This act marked the final severing of Barty's connection to his family, a symbolic patricide that completed his transition from the promising young student to the Death Eater wholly devoted to Voldemort. The culmination of Barty's year-long deception came during the third task of the Triwizard tournament. As the competitors entered the maze in search of the cup, Barty, patrolling the maze perimeter in his role as a tournament judge, systematically removed obstacles from Harry's path, while placing the other champions in danger. He stunned Fleur Delacour and placed Viktor Krum under the Imperious Curse, using him to attack Cedric Diggory. When Harry and Cedric jointly reached the cup and were transported to the graveyard, the final phase of Voldemort's plan was set in motion. Peter Pettigrew killed Cedric immediately, then used Harry's blood in the ritual that restored Voldemort to his full physical form. Harry's eventual escape and return to Hogwarts with Cedric's body set in motion the events that would lead to Barty's exposure. In the confusion following Harry's return, Barty made a crucial error, taking Harry away from Dumbledore on the pretext of getting him medical attention. He instead revealed too much of his knowledge about Voldemort's ritual. Harry recognized the incongruity, and Dumbledore, alerted by this and other subtle clues, arrived with Professors McGonagall and Snape to overpower Barty, just as he was preparing to kill Harry. Under the influence of Verite Serum administered by Professor Snape, Barty confessed everything: his Death Eater past, his escape from Azkaban, his impersonation of Moody, and the entire scheme to restore Voldemort to power. His confession, delivered with disturbing pride and lacking any remorse, revealed the extent of his fanatical devotion to Voldemort. "The Dark Lord and I," he declared, "have much in common. Both of us, for instance, had very disappointing fathers. Both of us suffered the indignity of being named after those fathers. And both of us had the pleasure, the very great pleasure, of killing our fathers." The aftermath of this confession led to the final tragedy in Barty Crouch Jr.'s story. Left guarded by an inexperienced Auror Cornelius Fudge, having refused to believe his confession about Voldemort's return, Barty was subjected to a Dementor's kiss on the minister's orders. This punishment, widely considered more terrible than death itself, removed his soul while leaving his body alive, rendering him an empty shell incapable of thought, feeling, or memory. Reflecting on Barty Crouch Jr. Us life reveals a complex tragedy of wasted potential and corrupted talent. Born with intelligence and magical ability that could have led to positive achievements, he instead channeled these gifts into serving a dark cause. His story encompasses multiple betrayals: his betrayal of his father's principles, his father's betrayal of justice in helping him escape Azkaban, and finally, his betrayal of the trust placed in him as a Hogwarts professor. Perhaps most significantly, Barty represents a cautionary tale about the dangers of seeking belonging and validation from the wrong sources. Rejected or ignored by his father, he found in Voldemort someone who recognized and valued his abilities. However perversely, this misplaced loyalty transformed a promising young wizard into one of the most dangerous Death Eaters, willing to commit murder, practice unforgivable curses, and subject a school full of children to unconscionable risk, all to earn the approval of the Dark Master who had filled the void left by his own father's emotional absence. The elaborate deception Barty maintained at Hogwarts, sustaining a false identity for months, while methodically executing a complex plan, demonstrates both his considerable talents and the depths to which those talents were corrupted. Few Death Eaters possessed the patience, intelligence, and self-control required to maintain such a masquerade, particularly under the watchful eye of Albus Dumbledore. That Barty succeeded for so long hints at what he might have accomplished had his gifts been directed toward more worthy ends. As our exploration of Barty Crouch Jr. concludes, and sleep begins to claim your consciousness, perhaps consider the nature of loyalty itself, how powerfully it can motivate us, yet how devastating it can become when directed toward those unworthy of such devotion. What determines the objects of our deepest loyalty, and how might we ensure that our own talents and abilities serve purposes that build rather than destroy?